before the ink of history had dried, before every map was inked and claimed. A haunting question began to whisper beneath the noise of time, one we've never truly been able to silence. What if some civilizations never truly vanished? What if they didn't collapse, but simply stepped back, withdrew, watching, waiting from behind the veil of time, or from shattered temples overtaken by jungle vines? Two forgotten scripts that speak of skybound cities and kingdoms buried beneath the earth. The stories refuse to die. The evidence, it doesn't scream, but it never goes quiet. Subtle threads in the archaeological record. Strange gaps in the timelines. Cultures that seem to arrive from nowhere, with wisdom that felt out of place. Inventions too sophisticated for the age they belong to. And disappearances leadly clean. It's like they were never meant to leave a trace. Not just weather, not just war. Something deeper. Something unfinished. Could they still be out there? Tucked into the forgotten corners of the earth? Beneath the black depths of our oceans? Within mountains no eye has charted? Or under layers of sand and time, sealed away by silence? Civilizations that once sculpted the world we walk on, and perhaps still shape it in ways we've yet to understand. The signs are scattered like breadcrumbs, the mystery's still waiting. So lie back. Breathe deep. Follow this thread of wonder into the unknown, as we ask the one question that may never rest. What if some ancient civilizations never really left us? Or maybe they're just waiting for us to remember. The Kingdom of Lioness. A place that might not exist, or maybe it does and we just haven't found it yet. The Kingdom of Lioness is said to have been situated somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, but exactly where, no one knows. There are a few clues, though. It was apparently an island, probably quite a large one, since there are references to rivers and mountains within it. And it was apparently located somewhere near Cornwall and Devon, possibly off the southwestern tip of England. So what happened? How did this legendary island kingdom get lost? Well, according to legend, a series of earthquakes swallowed up the land. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone, sunk beneath the waves forever. But that's not the whole story, because before this great catastrophe, Leonis had fallen under the spell of King Arthur. In fact, legend tells us that this magical island was the birthplace of the great wizard Merlin. It was here where he learned the ways of the Druids, presumably from his mother, who was apparently a druidess. But then he disappeared for several years, and when he returned, it was as an adult, with no memory of his childhood at all. Was he taken by the Tuatha De Danann? Were they responsible for educating him in the arts of magic? It's possible. When Merlin eventually came back to Lyoness, he started working his magic, causing springs of water to bubble up out of the ground, forming lakes, streams, and rivers. He built cities, towns, and villages, and encouraged people to settle there, turning it into a thriving and prosperous kingdom. For a time, the Kingdom of Leonis thrived, existing for 300 years in peace and harmony with nature. A true utopia ruled over by a succession of benevolent kings. But then, as it often does, the outside world intruded upon their way of life. See, the Kingdom of Leonis was renowned throughout the known world for its beauty and abundance. People from all around Europe traveled there to see it for themselves. But two men in particular made the journey, Brutus and Albanactus. Both Trojan princes who had fled to Britain after the destruction of Troy. These two were blown away by what they saw. This enchanted island paradise was everything they dreamed of and more, but it was already occupied by the giants. They weren't exactly the friendliest bunch, and so our Trojan heroes had no choice but to attack. After slaying many giants, the rest fled into the mountains, where they've lived ever since as a tribe of wild men. The ancestors of the Cornish and Welsh people, if you will. But now Brutus and Albanactus could rule the island as kings, establishing a dynasty that would last for 400 years. They established a new capital city called Dinas, which may be the same as what we today call Tintagel, and set about making the kingdom even greater than it had been before. But unfortunately, their success didn't last long. The first threat to their new kingdom came from the Saxons, who landed in Britain and began pillaging everywhere. So the two kings raised an army and went to meet them on the battlefield. As they fought, however, something terrible happened. Both kings were slain, falling victim to Saxon swords. This plunged Lyoness into a civil war that lasted for 8 years. But ultimately, the kingdom emerged stronger and more united than ever before. After this dark period, Linus enjoyed another golden age, this time under the rule of King Mark, who supposedly introduced Christianity to his people. During his reign, a church was built in every village and town, and many monasteries were constructed too. Apparently, Mark was a generous and fair-minded king, and so his people flourished. There was just one problem, though. See, Linus was supposed to be childproof. According to legend, when Merlin was still just a young boy living in the forest, he encountered a fairy who prophesied that one day he would father a son who would go on to become the most powerful wizard in the world. But as you might have guessed, Merlin thought this prophecy was absolutely dreadful. Preferred the quiet life and all that came with being an unassuming wizard, and so he did everything he could to avoid having children. Fortunately for him, the great fairy was very persuasive, and before long Merlin found himself a father. Oh, and to make matters worse, his son Mordred turned out to be a bit of a handful. Don't get me wrong. He wasn't bad per se, but he was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. See, while his father was away fighting the Saxons, Mordred took control of Linus and declared himself king. Of course, this meant going to war with his own father, which is always awkward. And during the conflict, Mordred's forces were defeated and he was forced to flee. Now normally Merlin would have been happy to let this defeat stand. After all, he didn't like being king, but this time he knew that if he didn't take action, Mordred would come back and cause even more problems. And so he followed him, tracked him all the way to the Scottish Isles, where he was offered sanctuary by the local chieftain. Now, normally Merlin would have accepted this hospitality, but this time he declined it. Instead, he used his magic to create a great storm, which wrecked the chieftain's fleet, killing everyone on board. Oh, that might seem a little extreme, but Merlin was a powerful wizard, remember, and he was desperate. He then turned his attention back to Mordred and used his magic to transform him into a bird, chasing him all the way to the south coast of England, where it finally landed on an isolated rock. Here Merlin confronted his son once more and cast a final spell. This time he transformed Mordred into a hare and sent him on his way. Just like that, the kingdom of Linus was saved. But that doesn't mean that Mordred's story is over, because he went on to live many lives, being reincarnated 7 times before returning to Merlin as a human once more to finally defeat him. But that's a story for another time. After all this chaos, the kingdom of Linus enjoyed a brief period of peace and prosperity. But it wouldn't last, because soon the country was being ravaged by civil war once more. Rival nobles fought each other for control of the throne, weakening the kingdom and making it vulnerable to invasion. Fortunately, Linus would never recover. Its population dwindled and its power waned until it was nothing more than a shadow of its former self. Then suddenly, in the year 934 AD, everything changed. A group of Viking invaders sailed into the kingdom's capital, looted everything they could carry, and burned the city to the ground. Many of the nobles and their families were slaughtered, including the king and his heir. And so, with no obvious successor, the kingdom fell apart completely, disappearing into legend. But that's not the end of the story, because, according to legend, the landmass itself sank into the sea, swallowing the last of Linus into the ocean depths. As you can imagine, there's a lot of debate over whether or not any of this actually happened. Some scholars believe that the kingdom of Linus was entirely mythical, created by writers who wanted to capitalize on the popularity of the Arthurian legends. Others think that it really existed but was simply wiped off the face of the earth by rising sea levels. And then there are those who believe that it really did sink into the ocean, taken down by natural disaster. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. In the meantime, I want to thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the thumbs up button. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. They say only God can forgive you for your sins, but it seems this kingdom has something to say about that. It's me, and this is the horrifying story of the Kingdom of Saguenay. In the winter of 1976, 2 Canadian hikers set out into the frigid landscape near Saguenay, Quebec. Their destination was Lac aux Sables, a small lake deep in the forest known locally as the Lake of Pebbles. As they journeyed through the knee-deep snow, their breath forming frosty clouds in the frigid air, the men started to feel uneasy. The dense silence of the snow-laden woods pressed in on them, and an unnatural stillness blanketed the area, broken only by the crunch of their boots on the frozen ground. The trees stood stoic and unmoving like silent sentinels guarding the secrets of the forest. And the men couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being watched. As they finally approached the lake, their unease turned to shock. Before them lay a scene both mesmerizing and disturbing. Stretching across the frozen surface of the lake was a thick layer of pebbles and small stones. It looked as though someone had tossed countless rocks onto the ice, covering an area of roughly 230,000 square meters, which is about 85 acres. The sight was both perplexing and unsettling, leaving the hikers to wonder about the origins of this strange phenomenon. But what they were witnessing was not just a quirky natural oddity. It was a grim testament to a brutal massacre that had occurred in the area centuries ago. Welcome to the Kingdom of Saguenay. Now, before we delve into the mysteries surrounding the Kingdom of Saguenay, let's take a closer look at the region itself. Saguenay is located in the heart of Quebec's Lower St. Lawrence region. The area is renowned for its breathtaking natural beauty, with the mighty Saguenay River winding its way through a dramatic landscape of towering cliffs and lush forests. The river was named by French explorers in 1535 after the Algonquin word for the narrow strait, which aptly describes the river's majestic estuary where it meets the St. Lawrence. For centuries, the Saguenay region remained relatively isolated from the rest of the world. This isolation gave rise to a unique culture and a number of strange traditions, some of which still persist to this day. The people who called this region home developed a close-knit community bound by their shared experiences and the challenges of living in such a remote area. However, the tranquility of this region was shattered in the late 19th century when rumors began to spread of a mysterious plague-like illness sweeping through the local population. The disease, known as the wasting sickness, seemed to come out of nowhere, baffling doctors and scientists alike. Symptoms included fever, weakness, and an overall wasting away of the body, leading to death within days. Panic swept through the tight-knit communities as the illness seemed to be claiming victims at random, leaving no one safe. The fear of infection caused people to isolate themselves, but this only worsened the spread of the disease. Entire families were wiped out, leaving behind a trail of grief and despair. The situation became so dire that authorities were forced to take drastic measures. They implemented strict quarantine measures, hoping to contain the spread of the illness. But these efforts only served to deepen the sense of hopelessness and helplessness among the residents. As the disease continued to ravage the region, people began to turn to superstition and folklore for answers. Rumors spread of a curse or a vengeful spirit plaguing the land. The weight of the illness bore down on the Saguenay region for years, leaving an indelible mark on the community and its history. Fast forward to today, and the shadow of the past still looms over the region. While the wasting sickness may have subsided, its impact on the people and culture of Saguenay remains. The fear, isolation, and desperation that gripped the region during those dark times continued to resonate, shaping the collective memory of the community. And while the cause of the illness may have been lost to history, its legacy lives on in the hearts and minds of those who call Saguenay home. The disease wasn't the only strange thing to occur in the region. In the early 20th century, bizarre occurrences began to be reported in the Saguenay Fjord. These reports included sightings of strange lights dancing across the water, eerie sounds echoing over the fjord, and even unexplained disappearances. Residents spoke of a mysterious mist that descended upon the fjord, causing havoc among ships and isolating coastal communities. Some even claimed to have witnessed ghostly apparitions roaming the shoreline. Forever trapped between the worlds of the living and the dead, these chilling tales created a sense of unease and mystery that permeated throughout the region. People began to whisper of a curse or a malevolent entity haunting the fjord. Fearful whispers traveled through the tight-knit communities, each tale adding another layer of intrigue to the enigma of the Saguenay Fjord. Then there were the unexplainable disappearances that plagued the region. People vanished without a trace, leaving behind a profound sense of dread and uncertainty. Families were torn apart, loved ones were lost, and the sense of security that once defined the Saguenay Fjord was shattered. The weight of these disappearances cast a long shadow over the region, leaving an enduring legacy of fear and sorrow. This day, the specter of those missing individuals continues to haunt the Saguenay Fjord, serving as a haunting reminder of the region's enigmatic past. And then there was the case of the stone-covered lake. Legends speak of a horrifying event that unfolded in the area around the lake. A group of men working in the forestry industry are said to have stumbled upon a clearing, eerily devoid of any trees. Curiosity piqued. They ventured deeper into the area and discovered something that would send chills down their spines. They found the remains of a small village, complete with abandoned homes and structures that told tales of a once thriving community. But this was no ordinary settlement.
Oh.
It was a village inhabited by members of the enigmatic First Nations tribe, the Nittaewo. As the men explored further, they came across something that defied explanation. Scattered across the clearing were thousands of small pebbles and stones that appeared to have been meticulously placed. What initially seemed like a peculiar arrangement soon transformed into a scene of unspeakable horror. As they uncovered more of the stones, they realized they were forming a large circle. And at the center of this ominous circle, they found something that would leave an everlasting scar on their memories. Human remains lay at the center of the stone circle, suggesting a brutal and sinister ritual.
Ow.
The bones were arranged in a manner that indicated a violent struggle, hinting at a terrifying ordeal endured by the villagers before their untimely demise. These disturbing discoveries painted a haunting picture of the village's final moments, suggesting a tragic fate that befell its inhabitants. With each step, the men pieced together fragments of a terrifying narrative, uncovering a dark chapter of the Montagnard's history. The site of the stone circle and human remains became known as the Kingdom of Saguenay, a grim testament to the brutality and mysteries that once gripped this region. The very air grew heavy with a sense of foreboding, whispering tales of ancient rituals and the chilling echoes of the past. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the landscape, the men felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over them. The tranquility of the forest had been replaced by an oppressive silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant call of an eerie bird. They quickened their pace, eager to escape the unsettling atmosphere of the Kingdom of Saguenay. But as they turned to leave, something caught their eye. Etched onto one of the stones was a symbol that seemed to glow ominously in the fading light. It was a symbol that defied their understanding, a relic of a bygone era that hinted at the existence of a forgotten civilization. This discovery sent a shiver down their spines, for it suggested that the Kingdom of Saguenay held secrets that had lain dormant for centuries. The men exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that they had stumbled upon something truly extraordinary and perhaps dangerous. With a mix of excitement and trepidation, they knew they had to investigate further, drawn to the enigmatic allure of the past. But here's the thing. Historians and archaeologists have not been able to confirm the validity of these legends. There are no official records or archaeological evidence to support the existence of the Kingdom of Saguenay, or the supposed atrocities that occurred there. Many believe that these stories are nothing more than myths and legends, concocted by locals to scare unsuspecting travelers or preserve the mystery and allure of the region. However, others argue that there may be some truth hidden beneath the layers of folklore. Proponents of this theory suggest that the stories could be based on real events that have been distorted over time, either intentionally to protect the sanctity of an ancient burial ground, or unintentionally through the oral tradition of storytelling. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. It's a blend of fact and fiction that has become so ingrained in the culture of Saguenay that it is now impossible to separate the two. Regardless of its true nature, the legend of the Kingdom of Saguenay continues to captivate people from all walks of life. The idea of a hidden village, a lost civilization, and the haunting presence of an ancient curse serve as a reminder of the enigmatic nature of our world. Whether viewed as a cautionary tale, a cultural artifact, or a gateway to the unknown, the stories of the Kingdom of Saguenay beckon us to explore the depths of human curiosity and our insatiable desire to unravel the mysteries that lie at the edge of our understanding. So did these men really stumble upon a real ancient cursed village? You decide in the comments below. The Kingdom of Uber Iram, of the Pillars, somewhere beyond the burning horizon. Where maps fade and the earth blurs into myth, there is a silence too deep to be empty.
Oh.
In a desert so vast it swallows memory, legend speaks of a city not lost to time, but to sand, a city the winds still whisper about. This is the Kingdom of Ubar, in the southern deserts of Oman, where the wind carves ripples into endless dunes and the sun scorches the earth with an ancient intensity. There lies a region known as the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, It is a vast, unforgiving expanse of sand, one of the most inhospitable places on earth, and yet buried beneath its silence and dust, legend whispers of a lost city. A kingdom once called Iram of the Pillars. Others know it as Uber, the Atlantis of the sands, to the untrained eye. This might seem like just another story carried by the desert wind, but the Quran itself mentions Iram, a city of lofty pillars, the like of which was never built in the land. In Islamic tradition, it was a place of unimaginable wealth and arrogance, ruled by the people of Da when they turned away from righteousness. Divine punishment is said to have struck swallowing their civilization in a storm of sand, erasing their pride from the surface of the world. For centuries, that's all it remained. A parable, a myth, a tale told to caution against hubris. But in the 1990s, the line between myth and history began to blur. Using satellite imagery from NASA, researchers identified an ancient network of caravan routes, pathways etched into the land by the constant passage of traders moving frankincense, gold, and spices across the Arabian Peninsula. At a point where these trade routes converged, near a place called Shizar, archaeologists uncovered the ruins of a fortified settlement, stone walls, collapsed limestone, subterranean chambers. The evidence was real-lynchable, and soon some began to believe they had found Uber. The discovery made headlines. Could this be the fabled Iram of the Pillars? Had the city of legend truly been found beneath the desert's shifting skin? The ruins bore signs of sudden collapse, perhaps due to a sinkhole. Perhaps something more. Was this the divine retribution spoken of in Scripture, reimagined through the lens of geology? Still, the questions linger. The archaeological site at Shasu dates back to the first millennium BC. It appears to have been a key stop along the incense trade, possibly even a regional capital. But the size of the ruins is modest, hardly the grand metropolis of myth. Where are the towering pillars, the sprawling palaces, the evidence of a mighty kingdom that rivaled the world's great cities? Is it possible that Uber was not a single city, but a collective memory? A tapestry of multiple desert outposts stitched together by travelers? Tales distorted over time into a single epic narrative? And if Uber did fall, what caused its downfall? Some scholars point to environmental collapse, the drying of vital aquifers, the shifting of the dunes, a changing climate that rendered the region uninhabitable. Others speculate about internal strife, foreign invasions, or the slow death of trade. But these are only fragments, pieces of a puzzle with no clear border, no certainty. Then there are the stranger possibilities. Some local Bedouins speak of ruins farther out in the sands, half-buried, structures that appear and vanish like mirages. There are tales of columns emerging from the earth after violent sandstorms only to be reburied the next day. Stories of travelers who wandered into the desert and never returned, and though there is no proof of these accounts, the desert does not easily give up its secrets. Could there be more beneath the dunes than we realize? Could entire sectors of a forgotten kingdom lie untouched, waiting for the right moment or the right technology to be revealed? The empty quarter is still one of the least explored regions on the planet. What might still slumber beneath its shifting veil? There are even fringe theories, speculative, often dismissed by mainstream academia, yet persistent in their allure. Some suggest that Uber may not have been entirely human in origin, at its rapid rise and sudden obliteration. Mere ancient stories from across the globe. Cities of light wiped out in an instant. Others connect it with the broader phenomenon of lost desert civilizations, suggesting that a once thriving network of advanced cultures may have flourished in Arabia long before known history began to record their presence. Whether these ideas are fanciful or prophetic remains unknown. But in a world where ancient Göbekli Tepe lay buried for 12,000 years before discovery, and where new ruins continue to surface with each passing year, the line between possible and impossible grows thinner by the decade, so we return to the sands, to the silence, to the stories half told by wind and stone. Did Uber ever truly exist? Or is it an echo, a symbol of all that has been forgotten in time's relentless tide? And if it did exist, could part of it still be out there, hidden just? Beyond our reach, preserved beneath 1,000 years of desert breath. Perhaps the sands are still watching. Perhaps the pillars are waiting to rise once more. The Fomorians, as the mists of lioness dissolve back into the sea, something stirs beneath the waves. Not all ancient powers vanished without leaving a trace. Some simply retreated, waiting, watching. Our journey now brings us to a place where the land remembers more than it tells. A place where myth and soil bleed into each other so completely, it's nearly impossible to separate one from the other. This is Ireland, and in its shadows dwell the Fomorians, and as the mists of lioness settle back into the sea, we turn. Now toward a land where myth and landscape are so tightly woven, it becomes almost impossible to pull them apart. We arrive at the western edge of Europe, wind-swept, rain-drenched, and deeply ancient. This is Ireland, a place of rolling green hills, jagged coastlines, and stones older than time itself. And in the deep roots of its oldest legends lies a civilization. It's unlike any other, a people known not just for their mystery, but for their terror. They are called the Moriori. To hear the word spoken in Gaelic myth is to summon images both strange and powerful, described as giants. Sea raiders, deformed spirits of chaos, or perhaps something else entirely. The Fomorians appear in the earliest Irish texts, predating even the famed Tuatha the Danann, according to the Leber. Gabala Erend, the Book of Invasions, the Fomorians were among the original inhabitants of Ireland, rising from the sea or the dark places of the earth, long before the arrival of humankind. They were rulers, tyrants, and sometimes gods. And then, one day, they were gone. But were they ever really here to begin with? Legends say the Fomorians lived in the sea or on remote islands far beyond the western horizon. Some accounts place their strongholds beneath the waves, others in hidden mountain fortresses. They were not simply another tribe. They were a presence, a force of nature, both feared and revered. Their leader, Balor, of the evil eye, to kill with a single glance. And yet, even as they waged war and shaped the early world of Celtic myth, their true origin was always unclear. Were they invaders from another land? Or were they the land's first guardians, twisted by time and memory into something darker? Unlike many mythic peoples, the Fomorians are difficult to pin down. They are not easily categorized as spirits, nor mortals, nor gods. Some scholars have suggested they represent the raw, tamed forces of nature, chaos, storm, sea, and death embodied in humanoid form. Others see them as a distorted memory of a real pre-Celtic people, perhaps a forgotten seafaring culture, once powerful in the British Isles, whose memory was preserved only through distorted echoes and myth. And then, there is the geography. Ireland is a land full of megalithic structures, dolmens, passage tombs, in stone circles whose purposes remain elusive. Sites like Newgrange and Carrowmore predate the pyramids of Egypt, and yet we know so little about those who built them. Could these mysterious monuments be remnants of a civilization that once thrived here, later demonized or mythologized as the Fomorians? Or were the Fomorians never meant to be remembered as entirely human? Some stories describe them as one-eyed, or having limbs of different sizes, or skin like bark or stone. They were said to arrive in dark ships, shrouded in mist. Certain later interpretations link them to pirates or Norse invaders, but the stories are far older than the Viking Age, and throughout it all, a single theme persists. The Fomorians come from the sea, they vanish into the sea, and they may yet return. From the sea, in modern times archaeologists have uncovered traces of maritime cultures along the Atlantic coast of Europe dating back thousands of years. It's far earlier than once believed. Could the Fomorians be a cultural memory of seaborne people who arrived on Irish shores millennia before the Celts, trading, raiding, or settling briefly before disappearing? It's not impossible. Even stranger theories suggest the Fomorians were not just ancient humans or spirits, but something entirely different. Some fringe researchers propose they were survivors of a forgotten Atlantic civilization, perhaps linked to broader flood myths from around the world. Others speculate about pre-ice age maritime societies whose knowledge was lost with rising seas, leaving behind only faint traces in story and stone. Of course, these ideas remain unproven. The Fomorians exist primarily in myth, but the consistency of their imagery across centuries, the recurring association with sea and storm, singing, and the unexplained silence surrounding their origin invite more questions than answers. Why did the Irish remember the Fomorians with such clarity, yet never record where they came from or where they went? Why do so many ancient cultures speak of seaborne peoples with great power and strange appearance? And why, even now, do parts of the Irish coast still feel somehow haunted by wind, by stone, and by something deeper? Perhaps the Fomorians were never just a people, but a symbol of what came before memory, before record, before history, or perhaps, in some form, they're still out there, beneath the waves, beyond the mist, waiting, and as the sea mists around, the Fomorians drift back into legend. We're left to wonder if they were ever gone at all. The Aztecatlan culture as the golden mists rise from Lake Guatavita, and the breath of the Miska fades into the Andean winds. We drift northwest to a land that pulses with memory. Rivers wind through ancient jungle. Volcanoes watch from the highlands. And here, somewhere between history and silence, a civilization fades, not with destruction, but with mystery. This is the story of the Aztecatlan culture. As the fog lifts from Lake Guatavita, and the echoes of the Muisca still whisper through the Andean winds, we drift northwest into the fertile valleys and rugged coasts of western Mexico. Here where rivers weave through jungle and volcanic slopes fall away to the Pacific, traces remain of a civilization once described as both a cultural bridge and a phantom kingdom, a people remembered not for how they ended, but for the way they seem to have faded. This is the enigma of the Aztecatlan culture, the lands they occupied stretching across modern-day Nayarit, Sinaloa, Jalisco, and parts of Durango are a tapestry of riverbanks, mangroves, and highlands. Aztecatlan settlements rose along waterways like the Rio Santiago and Rio San Pedro, often surrounded by dense vegetation and shifting terrain. The environment is humid, heavy, with the scent of earth and rain, and filled with the sounds of life, yet it guards its secrets well. Time and forest have worked together to erase what once stood here in permanence. Archaeologists classify Aztecatlan not as a centralized empire, but as a tradition, a network of interconnected city-states and communities that shared language, customs, and trade from around 900 to 1350 AD. They are known for their vibrant ceramics, their turquoise-inlaid ornaments, and their role in one of the largest trade systems of pre-Columbian North America. Goods from as far as the American Southwest and central Mexico moved through Aztecatlan hands: obsidian, cacao, marine shells, feathers, copper, jade. This was not an isolated people, it was a civilization in motion. And yet, so much about them remains unclear. The word Aztecatlan itself bears a peculiar resonance in Nahuatl. It means place of herons. But it is also hauntingly familiar for another reason. According to Aztec origin myths, Aztlan, spelled nearly identically, was the mysterious homeland from which the Mexica or Aztecs once migrated before founding Tenochtitlan, a land of white reeds, lakes, and temples, a land that has never been found. Is this coincidence of names merely linguistic drift, or is it a clue? Could the Aztecatlan culture have been the last echo of that mythical homeland, forgotten by time, preserved only in scattered ceramics and oral tradition? We know that the Aztecs believed Aztlan lay to the northwest, and we know that the Aztecatlan region falls squarely within that direction. The geographic overlap is tantalizing. Even more so when we consider that the cultural traits of the Aztecatlan people, ceremonial ball courts, tiered platforms, specific burial practices, bear a resemblance to those seen in both northern and central Mesoamerican civilizations. They seem to occupy a liminal space. neither entirely northern nor southern, a cultural crossroads. And then, around the 14th century, the Aztlan tradition disappears. Archaeological layers grow silent. Settlements are abandoned. Pottery styles vanish. Trade slows, and no written record survives to tell us why. Was it war, drought, disease, or did the Aztlan people simply move, blending into other populations, migrating inland or southward, becoming part of the Aztec Empire that was just beginning to rise? Some scholars suggest that the Aztlan were absorbed into the larger, Nahuatl-speaking populations that came to dominate central Mexico. Others believe they fragmented into smaller, less centralized groups. But none of these theories can fully explain the suddenness of their disappearance or the lingering presence of their influence, because something remains. In certain towns along the rivers of Nayarit, oral histories still speak of ancestral cities now swallowed by jungle. In ceremonial centers like Chacala and Isla del Rio, unexplained structures hint at knowledge lost. Petroglyphs appear on remote rock faces, symbols whose meanings are still debated. Some of the glyphs match those seen hundreds of kilometers away. Were these part of a sacred writing system? Or signs left for those who knew how to read the land? And then there's the speculative. Those who believe the Aztlan culture may not have vanished entirely, but retreated into hidden valleys, into caves, into other names and identities. There are local legends of people who left not because they were defeated, but because they chose to disappear. Some connect them to the Chichimeca, others to wandering priestly castes, said to have traveled with knowledge from a time before cities. A few fringe theories even link Aztlan to the broader idea of lost mother cultures, those hypothetical ancient civilizations from which the known Mesoamerican empires may have descended. The name Aztlan, in these interpretations, is not just a region but a key, a linguistic artifact pointing back to a primordial homeland we've yet to find, one that may lie beneath floodplains, beneath volcanic ash, or beneath our assumptions. The truth, as always, remains elusive. What we do know is that the Aztlan culture connected north and south, past and future, that they stood at the edge of myth and memory, and that they left behind a trail, not of ruins or monuments, but of faint impressions, spread wide across a landscape still reluctant to give up its past. So we are left with a question not only about who the Aztlan were, but about where they might have gone. Were they the stewards of a forgotten migration? It's a culture that chose to vanish rather than be conquered? Or are they still there in name, in blood, in ritual, waiting quietly for us to see them, not as a mystery, but as a message from a time just beyond our grasp? The rivers still flow. The herons still gather. And somewhere in the space between myth and map, Aztlan may still exist as the echoes of Aztlan drift westward beyond. The Chono peoples, the winds of Lemnos, fall silent, carrying with them the last forgotten words of the Lemnian culture. Our journey takes us far south, beyond deserts, mountains, and forests down the spine of the Americas. And there where the land breaks into countless islands and the sea becomes a maze of fog and cold channels, something ancient waits beneath the waves. This is the realm of the Chono, not lost through conquest, but perhaps through choice. And as the winds of Lemnos fall silent, carrying with them the last forgotten words of the Lemnian culture, we now journey far south, down the length of the Americas, beyond deserts, mountains, and forests, to a place where land fractures into countless islands, and the sea becomes a maze of cold, mist-shrouded channels here, in the extreme southern reaches of Chilean Patagonia, among the fjords, ice-clad peaks, and tangled archipelagos of the Chiloe and Ison regions. A different kind of civilization once moved quietly, gracefully, through the waters, a seafaring people, elusive, self-sufficient, and nearly invisible to time. They were known as the Chona. Most. Their name is little more than a footnote in colonial records. Mentioned briefly by Spanish explorers and missionaries as inhabitants of the fragmented islands south of Chiloe, and yet for centuries, The Chono people thrived in one of the harshest environments on Earth. They built no cities, left no stone, temples, no written histories. Their trails were etched only into waves, fog, and memory. But in the silence of the sea channels, their legacy still whispers. The Chono were maritime nomads, expert navigators. Of the labyrinthine waterways that cut through the Patagonian fjords, they traveled in canoes made of coiled planks called dalkas, perfectly suited for the rough, unpredictable seas of the southern Pacific. They fished, hunted sea lions, gathered shellfish, and moved seasonally from island to island. Their dwellings were temporary, domed huts of bark and skins. Their world was fluid, shifting, like the tides, and then they vanished. By the late 18th century, the Chono were considered extinct. By colonial authorities, disease, displacement, forced assimilation, missionary pressure all contributed to their disappearance from the historical record. Some were absorbed into neighboring groups such as the Kvesker or Hu. Others may have retreated, even deeper into the coastal wilds, but no decisive moment marked their end. Like the fog that so often surrounds their homeland, the Chono simply drifted from view. But did they truly vanish? In recent decades, scholars and explorers have returned to the islands, once inhabited by the Chono, and they've found signs that the story may not be over. Local fishermen and Patagonian families speak of isolated settlements, clusters of huts found deep in remote fjords, long abandoned, yet strangely recent in construction. Some have reported encountering individuals or families in the 20th century who lived in near-total isolation, speaking in dialects not fully recognized, claiming no clear ancestry in the densest corners of the archipelago, where no roads reach. Boats travel for days without sight of another human. Could remnants of the Chono have survived, hidden in the folds of a landscape no empire ever truly conquered? There is also the question of identity. The Chono left no written language. Their traditions were preserved through practice, memory, and navigation. Maps passed hand to hand, carved into experience rather than parchment. Spanish. Chroniclers recorded only fragments, often distorted by misunderstanding. What we call Chono may not have been a single people, but a diverse group of seafaring clans linked by territorial lifestyle, a necessity but independent in thought and language. Could some of those groups have simply chosen to disappear? Archaeological evidence is sparse but evocative. Midden heaps of shells and bones, remnants of dalka workshops, fire pits buried under moss and soil. These humble remains speak of continuity, of a people who lived lightly on the land, but deeply in rhythm with the sea. Their spiritual practices, hinted at through ritual hearths and burial placements, remain largely unknown. The Chono cosmology, how they saw themselves in relation to the water, sky, and shifting coastlines, was never fully recorded. That knowledge may have vanished, or perhaps was never meant to be shared. And then there are the maps. Early Spanish charts of the region occasionally mark settlements or anchor points far deeper into the archipelagos than expected. Some show names and notes referencing native harbors, safe passages, and places of gathering, entries that later cartographers quietly removed as those areas became uninhabited. Did these marks represent real Chono territories? And if so, why were they erased? Some researchers suggest that the Chono deliberately misled colonial explorers, steering them away from sacred sites, confusing their maps, vanishing into labyrinths of islands known only to them. Others argue that the geography itself provided cover with over 5,000 islands and countless uncharted inlets. It would have been, and still is, it's entirely possible to live unnoticed for generations. Could some Chono lineages have survived into the present? Their names changed, their identity protected by silence. Could the people we now call by other labels, isolated fishers, remote subsistence communities, carry within them the living thread of this vanished culture? Even today, the Patagonian fjords are among the most remote places on Earth. Much of the region remains poorly mapped. Satellite imagery often cannot penetrate the dense fogs and overhanging canopies. Boats, not roads, remain the only means of travel. Entire islands may go years without a visitor. So what exactly is still out there? A forgotten canoe resting in a tidal cove. A language still spoken in whispers around a fire no one else will see. Or perhaps an entire way of life preserved. In secret, guarded by the silence of water and the resolve of a people who once knew the cost of being found, the wind still moves through the channels. The sea still speaks in its ancient rhythm. And somewhere in that rhythm, the Chono may still be listening, waiting for the world to remember that not all civilizations are lost through collapse. Some simply choose to disappear. The Agathyrsius we leave behind, the spiral earthworks of poverty, point so deliberate, so silent we're pulled across the ocean once again. This time into the damp mists and dense forests of ancient Europe. A place where time folds softly into soil, and where a forgotten people once moved like shadows through a land of rivers and memory. Their name almost lost, but not entirely. These were the Ajat, as we leave behind the earthwork spirals of poverty points so deliberate. So silent, we cross back over the Atlantic into the mists of ancient Europe. Our journey now takes us to the dense forests and broad plains that stretch from the Carpathians to the Black Sea, a land of rivers that flow like veins through the soil of time. A land once haunted by a people whose name has nearly faded, but whose traces remain scattered like bones beneath the hills. They were the Agathyrsi, a civilization spoken of in riddles by ancient historians and largely forgotten by the modern world. The earliest mention of the Agathyrsi comes from the Greek historian Herodotus. Writing in the 5th century BC, he described them as a richly adorned, tattooed people. Living in what is now Romania and western Ukraine, they were said to wear gold jewelry in great abundance, and to practice a strange form of communal marriage. They shared wives, he wrote, so that all men might regard one another as brothers. They painted their bodies. They wore elaborate garments. And perhaps most intriguingly, they held their kings and their laws sacred above all else. But who were they really? Even in the ancient world, the Agathyrsi were an enigma. Herodotus suggested they were akin to the Scythians, nomadic horse riders of the vast Eurasian steppe. Others hinted at links to the Thracian or Dacian peoples, known for their warrior culture and rich spiritual traditions, and yet the Agathyrsi stood apart. Their customs were unique. Their appearance, their rituals, even their beliefs seemed to form a civilization not quite like any other. Archaeologically, the trail is difficult to follow. Burial mounds, kurgans, dot the landscapes once associated with Agathyrsi territory. Many are filled with items characteristic of Scythian craftsmanship: bronze weapons, gold ornaments, horse harnesses, but in some cases the graves seem different. Bodies adorned with jewelry not typical of the steppe cultures. Grave goods that suggest settled life, not full nomadism. Some tombs show evidence of elite status rulers, perhaps, or priests laid to rest with ceremonial objects, whose purpose is still unknown. Were these the graves of the Agathyrsi, or merely their neighbors? Linguistically, the puzzle deepens. The Agathyrsi left behind no written language of their own, at least. None that has been discovered. What little we know comes through the lens of foreign observers. But certain clues have survived. Some scholars speculate that the name Agathyrsi itself may derive from a Thracian or Indo-Iranian root, suggesting a blend of traditions, a people standing at the crossroads of cultures. Their homeland, after all, was a point of convergence where the Danube bends, where the steppe meets the forest, where east and west touched. So, what became of them? By the time of Roman expansion into Dacia, the Agathyrsi are no longer mentioned. They vanish from the written record. Some believe they were absorbed into the larger Dacian tribes, their name lost as empires shifted and borders changed. Others think they were wiped out by waves of conquest from Scythians, from Celts, from Rome itself. But perhaps they simply faded, retreated into the mountains, into myth, into silence. And yet, whispers remain. In Romanian folklore, there are stories of ancient kings who ruled before Dacia, kings who wore tattoos like armor, who spoke the language of stars and forests in certain villages near the Carpathians. Archaeological surveys have uncovered fragments of unknown origin, carvings of figures in robes, holding symbols that match no known alphabet. Some researchers have found unusual patterns in DNA samples from the region, suggesting the persistence of a distinct population long after written history had forgotten their name. And then there is the gold in tombs stretching from the Tisa River to the Transylvanian Plateau. Golden artifacts have been unearthed, crafted with incredible skill. Some of these items show iconography not seen in Scythian or Thracian art, faces with radiant eyes, sunburst symbols, stylized birds. Are these remnants of the Agathyrsi elite, or echoes of an older spiritual system preserved in metal and buried in earth? Some fringe theorists have even proposed that the Agathyrsi were not just a people, but the custodians of forgotten knowledge, an initiatic priestly caste lost in the folds of time. They point to the writings of Dacian seers, the mysterious sanctuary of Sarmasagatus, ancient references to sacred laws upheld with religious fervor. Could the Agathyrsi have been something more than a tribe? Could they have been a secret-keeping class, preservers of cosmology, astronomy, and rites, that predated the rise of empire? These ideas are speculative, but they are not without intrigue. In a world where history is often written by victors, the quiet civilizations, those who did not build empires but sustained, balance tend to disappear. The Agathyrsi may have been such a people. Their story lies not in grand monuments but in the silence between the hills, in the curve of gold unearthed from a forgotten tomb, in the pattern of tattoos described by a man who met them 2,500 years ago. So we are left with a name, a handful of artifacts, and a question: did the Agathyrsi vanish into history, or did they slip purposefully into the spaces where memory fades, but never quite dies? The forests of the Carpathians still whisper, and perhaps somewhere within them, the Agathyrsi still watch, waiting to be remembered. The Repaimas, the stone silence of DMT, lingers beneath the highland skies of Eritrea and northern Ethiopia. We move now across deserts scorched by legend and battlefields, lost to memory, into a place where myth and history do not walk apart, but side by side. Here in valleys once sacred and cities now forgotten, shadows linger longer than they should. This is the realm of the Repaima name. Ancient texts whisper with reverence, with fear, and perhaps with truth. They are called the Repaim, a people, or perhaps something more. They are spoken of in the Hebrew Bible, and in other ancient Near Eastern records, their name translated in many ways: giants, shades, spirits of the dead. But none of these meanings are certain. And while some accounts render the Repaim as figures of myth, others place them firmly in the world as rulers of cities, as lords of the underworld. As echoes of a vanished race, could they have once walked the earth? And if they did, what happened to them? To begin unraveling this mystery, we must look toward the volcanic highlands of Bashan, a windswept plateau in what is now southern Syria and northern Jordan. Rich in soil, ancient in story, this land is scattered with ruins, vast fields of megalithic remains, stone circles, dolmens, subterranean tombs, and among them stands Rugam al-Hiri, a sprawling monument of concentric rings, dating back over 5,000 years. They call it the Stonehenge of the Levant, but locals know it by a different name: Gilgal, Ipaimed, the Circle of the Repaim. That connection isn't coincidence. The Bible places the Repaim in Bashan. They were said to inhabit this land long before the Israelites arrived, in Deuteronomy. They're described as giants, a people great and many and tall. Their most famous king, Og of Bashan, was said to rule over 60 fortified cities. His bed, according to legend, was over 13 feet long. But was that hyperbole, or a glimpse of something once real? Some researchers believe the Repaim were more than story, perhaps a real tribe. Genetically distinct, physically tall, culturally dominant, until they vanished into history's fog. They're mentioned not once, but again and again, in Genesis, and Joshua in the books of Samuel. They weren't remembered as monsters. They were remembered as kings. And in the hills of Bashan, the land speaks. Hundreds of dolmens, massive stone tombs, the landscape. Many date back to the early Bronze Age. Inside, archaeologists have found skeletal remains, some taller than the average of their time. Others buried with ritual precision, their tombs sealed with care. But many of these graves were empty, sealed, but silent. Why? Who were these people? And why did they bury their dead this way? Even stranger, some of these burial sites align with solar and lunar events, indicating a cosmology far more advanced than a nomadic or pastoral culture should possess. Were they priest-kings? Astronomers? Guardians of a theology now buried? In time, some traditions go further. They claim the Rephaim weren't fully mortal, but beings born of both human and divine. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text long excluded from the canon, tells of the Watcher's angels who descended to earth, took human wives, and fathered a race of giants. These giants corrupted the world before the flood, and when they died, their spirits became the Rephaim, the restless dead, caught between worlds. Is that just myth? Or could it be a memory, twisted, retold? But rooted in truth, even the name raises questions. Hebrew, Rapha, means to heal, to release. But in its plural form Rephaim, it shifts into something darker. Ghosts, shades, those who linger beyond the grave. Ugaritic texts unearthed in ancient Syria describe the Rephaim as ancestral kings. Dwellers of the underworld summoned in ritual, were the Rephaim once deified ancestors? A ruling elite preserved in legend, later reimagined as demons. The lines blur, and the deeper we look, the less clear they become, but the stones remain in Bashan. The layout of ancient tombs bears uncanny resemblance to other megalithic cultures. Across the Mediterranean, from Malta to the Canary Islands, some fringe theorists take it further, linking the Rephaim to a lost Eurasian tradition of giant kings, or to survivors of a pre-flood civilization, one buried by time but preserved. In scripture and stone, these ideas remain controversial, but they point to a pattern. A question that won't go away. Why do so many cultures so far apart preserve tales of ancient giants, of kings who ruled, then vanished, of civilizations erased, but never truly forgotten? Perhaps the Rephaim were not giants of height, but giants of memory, so immense in influence, so powerful in presence that when their bodies disappeared, their spirits remained, not as people, not as rulers, yet, even now, as the basalt tombs of Bashan fade into shadow as the dust covers names we no longer speak. There are those who listen to the wind between the stones, to the silence in the soil, and wonder, were the Rephaim ever truly gone? Or are they simply waiting? Beneath the earth, behind the veil of time, watching, remembering, and waiting. To be remembered. The Lemnian culture, as the winds fall silent along the jagged cliffs of Sardinia, and the last echoes of the Shardana dissolve into the sea. We turn east across the deep blue of the Aegean toward a place often passed over, yet hiding something ancient. There, at the northern rim of the Aegean, lies the rugged island of Lemnos, windswept, weathered, wrapped in myth. But beneath its olive trees and scattered ruins rests a language no one expected, a voice from before the Greeks, culture, that spoke one sand then disappeared. On the surface, Lemnos looks like many other Mediterranean islands, rolling hills, dry stone terraces, sleepy villages. But deep in its earth, something extraordinary waited to be uncovered. In 1885, near the village of Kamenia, a group of workers digging along an eastern slope unearthed a curious stone, weathered, flat and carved with inscriptions. It wasn't Greek. The script was unfamiliar. It mirrored the Etruscan language of ancient Italy, a tongue already shrouded in mystery, and yet this stone had been buried here, on a Greek island, far from Etrilia's reach. This single artifact, now called the Lemnian stele, shook archaeology quietly, but deeply. The writing was unmistakable: Etruscan characters, Etruscan grammar, and possibly Etruscan names. But this was Lemnos, not Tuscany. How could such a link exist? The stone is dated to the 6th century BCE, long before Roman influence reached these parts. And yet the people who carved it, who lived, spoke, and died here, remain nameless. Shadowed, almost erased. No other major inscriptions have been found. No temples. No monumental tombs etched with script. Only fragments. Bits of pottery. Scattered settlements. And this one sentinel of stone, standing like a lost voice calling through the silence. Who were they, and where did they go? One theory paints the Lemnians as part of a deeper layer of Aegean history, a pre-Greek substratum. Perhaps voyagers who sailed eastward long before the rise of classical city-states. If true, it would mean that Lemnos served as a bridge, not just between cultures, but between worlds. Between what came before and what history would later remember. The connection to the Etruscans is undeniable. Could they have shared a common homeland, now forgotten beneath sea and soil? Or perhaps their ties were forged through long distance, seafaring and sustained trade. Some scholars suggest Etruscan mercenaries or traders may have once settled on Lemnos, bringing their language with them. But the linguistic evidence suggests something deeper. Not a visit, but a home. Not foreign, but native. And then there are the myths. Greek tradition treated Lemnos as a place of exile, a broken land for broken gods. Hephaestus, the god of fire and forge, was said to have fallen here after being cast from Olympus. The island was later populated, according to myth, by a strange people called the Sintians, noted for their wild, unfamiliar speech. Even Homer called Lemnos the land of the wild-speaking men. Is that just poetic invention? Or a distant echo of a real people whose tongue rang foreign, even to the earliest Greeks? Some fringe researchers go further, suggesting the Lemnians were remnants of a lost Mediterranean civilization, one that existed long before Indo-European. Languages spread across Europe. Others whisper theories of sea peoples, of maritime cultures swallowed by the rising seas of the post-Ice Age world. The theories stretch far, but the facts remain few. And still, the Lemnian stele sits quietly. Its language only partially translated, its meaning unclear. Was it a gravestone? A dedication? A political decree? We don't know until more texts are found. You can only guess at what it says and what it meant to the people who carved it. Recent archaeological surveys have begun to unearth new layers of Lemnos past. Ancient fortifications buried in ash and earth, unexplored caves tucked into hillsides, traces of habitation that stretch back thousands of years. Could another stone, another stele still lie hidden, waiting to speak? Maybe Lemnian culture wasn't destroyed. Maybe it didn't collapse in war. Maybe it was absorbed. Its words faded, its gods renamed, its stories retold, twisted into the myths we thought were Greek, or perhaps, like so many civilizations, on the edge the Lemnians chose to disappear quietly, leaving only traces behind. So now we are left with almost nothing. A name, a stone, a wind that brushes over the Aegean. And a question: was Lemnos once a crossroads? A final whisper from a forgotten world? People who stood between east and west, between history and myth? The island does not answer. It waits, unassuming, silent, holding its breath. And if we learn how to listen, perhaps, just perhaps, the Lemnians will speak again. The builders of Poverty Point as the last whispers of the Mandean tribes fade into the marshes of ancient Mesopotamia. We drift now across oceans, carried by silence and time. Our journey leads us deep into the heart of North America, to a place where the land breathes quiet and green, and history is written not in stone, but in earth. In northeastern Louisiana, above the old floodplains of the Mississippi River, lies a riddle carved in crescent ridges and towering mounds. This is Poverty Point, and whoever built it left behind only silence. At first glance, the site feels almost unremarkable, just rolling fields, curving grass-covered ridges, and a single massive mound rising above it all, watching. But beneath, That stillness is something astonishing. A mystery written in geometry, in earthwork, in absence, spanning nearly 900 acres. Poverty Point is one of the largest and most complex ancient constructions in North America. Yet when it was first discovered in the 1800s, its significance was barely understood. It would take decades and fresh eyes to see what was really there. Between 1700 and 1100 BCE, long before the Maya carved their temples, before Greece shaped its columns, a people in this place moved 15 million baskets of soil by hand. No metal tools, no draft animals. It's just human effort woven into a design so vast and precise. It challenges everything we thought we knew about early North American societies. The massive mound, shaped like a bird or a talon, rises 70 feet from the landscape. It may have been built in less than 90 days, a feat of planning, coordination, and spiritual resolve almost without parallel. Surrounding it, 6 C-shaped ridges fan out in symmetry. These weren't just walls, they were living spaces. Homes, each arranged with intention, like a city designed to echo something sacred. But who built them? We call them the Poverty Point culture, but that's a placeholder. A name for a people whose real name we do not know. They were hunter-gatherers, not farmers, not empire builders, at least not in the way we've come to define those things. Yet they organized monumental construction, coordinated vast labor, engaged in a trading network that spanned 800 miles. From the Great Lakes, they brought copper. From the Appalachians, soapstone. From the Ozarks, chert. They crafted beads, figurines, tools, pendants, some simple, some deeply symbolic. These weren't just objects. They were meaning etched into clay and stone and now scattered across time, and then sometime around 1100 BCE, it stopped. The people left. The mounds were abandoned. The ridges began to erode. But why? There is no evidence of war, no fires, no mass graves, no story of conquest carved into the earth. Some believe it was climate, a shift in ecology, or food sources. Others point to trade routes moving, or a spiritual transformation, a change in belief. So profound it pulled the people away from what they had built. But no theory holds the full truth. Even more strangely, no clear descendant culture has ever been identified. They didn't become someone else we can name. They simply vanish. And yet whispers remain in native oral traditions. Some speak of ancient ancestors from the east, from a circular city built in earth. Are these echoes of Poverty Point? The builders have splintered, moving into new lands under new names, carrying their knowledge quietly through the generations. Some believe they were part of a broader pan-regional civilization, a great ancestral culture that once connected the Gulf Coast to the Mississippi Valley and beyond. The Adena, the Hopewell, the Mississippian cultures, all came later. And they, too, built mounds. They traded across vast distances. They worshipped with geometry. But Poverty Point predates them all. And between them, there is a gap, one no one has yet bridged. Then there are the alignments. Some archaeologists believe that the ridges, the aisles, the very shape of the site were designed to mark the movements of the sun and moon. Solstices, equinoxes, lunar phases, a calendar etched in earth. If true, it means this wasn't just a home. It was a cosmology, a sacred map of heaven and earth. But if they understood so much, what happened to the knowledge? Where did it go? Unlike other ancient centers like Teotihuacan, Angkor, or even Cahokia, Poverty Point wasn't reborn, wasn't reclaimed. It wasn't even remembered. It was simply left uninhabited, untouched. And that, perhaps, is what makes it feel so haunting. Because the stillness is intentional. It holds a purpose we no longer understand. Did they choose to vanish? To leave no voice, no name, no myth, only geometry and silence? Was their knowledge passed down in other forms, in stories, in songs, in stone carvings we no longer know how to read? Or do their echoes still lie hidden beneath forested hills, within unnamed mounds, or inside the memories of people who no longer know who they are. Poverty Point reshapes what we think civilization looks like, forces us to ask who gets remembered and who slips beneath the surface of time. Its mounds still rise, its ridges still arc, and in that silence, the question waits. Who built this? Where did they go? What else lies beneath our feet, waiting for us to listen? The Ainu of Sakhalin across scattered volcanic islands, where clouds cling to pine-covered cliffs and the sea whispers through ancient fog, lies a land almost forgotten by time. Sakhalin, mysterious, remote, and wild. This island carries a silence that feels lived in, a silence shaped by memory, by presence, and by absence. Because once, long ago, this was the realm of the Inua people, whose name, like the island itself, seems to vanish into the mist. We often hear the Innu mentioned alongside Hokkaido, Japan's northernmost island, but for centuries, maybe even millennia, they stretched much farther. Their world arced like a fading constellation, from the Kuril Islands in the northeast to the forests of northern Honshu. Across the waters that separate Asia from the Pacific, and at the heart of that arc, wrapped in snow and storm, lies Sakhalina, place where the Ainu left a trail, now nearly invisible. Today, Sakhalin is a part of Russia, a long, narrow island, over 600 miles in length. Its coastlines are sharp, storm-lashed. Its heart is wilderness, dense forests, untamed rivers, and wind-worn ridges that few have ever truly mapped. And within that wilderness, Ainu once lived a branch separate from their Hokkaido kin, shaped by harsher winters, by deeper solitude, by rhythms that belonged not to civilization, but to the land itself. But who were they? Their language a puzzle with no solution. The Innu tongue is a linguistic isolate, with no clear relation to Japanese, Korean, or any neighboring dialect. Some researchers have proposed connections to Paleo-Siberian languages, even far-flung. Theories of Indo-European roots, but nothing has ever been proven. The mystery deepens when you realize that the Innu don't speak of where they came from. They speak of always being of emerging from the land, not arriving upon it. And genetically, they are distinct. Studies suggest strong ties to the Joman people, prehistoric hunter-gatherers, who walked Japan as early as 14,000 BC. Some believe the Ainu carry a cultural line so old, so uninterrupted, that it reaches back to the edge of written time. But in Sakhalin, that line was nearly severed. The 1800s and 1900s brought waves of colonial pressure, first from the Russian Empire, then from Japan. Displacement, assimilation, suppression. The Innu of Sakhalin were uprooted. Their villages emptied, their traditions outlawed, all their names erased. By the mid-20th century, official records declared them extinct. But mountains don't keep records. And neither do rivers, and the Innu, at least their memory, never really left in recent years. Whispers have begun to surface in the remote corners of Sakhalin. In quiet villages along the Tim River, researchers have heard strange lullabies. Fragments of forgotten dialects, ceremonies passed down not in books but in stories and in refusal. Grandfathers who never cut their hair, women who speak of bears, raised as kin, released in ritual and reverence. These aren't just memories, they're evidence. In 2019, linguists documented a few elders reciting prayers in a hybrid dialect of Ainu and Nivik, a language thought lost forever. It raises a question that won't quite go away. Did the Sakhalin Innu ever truly vanish? Or did they do what they had done before? Fade into the wilderness, blending with the land, choosing silence over surrender? The island itself offers hints. Along the rivers and coastal cliffs, archaeologists have found ancient fortresses, carvings. On stone, burial mounds with patterns not fully Russian, not fully Neved, but something else. Something older. Some of these sites are linked to the Okatsa culture, seafaring people thought to have merged with or evolved into northern Ainu groups. But the connection remains uncertain. Could there be a cultural continuum, a quiet thread, of identity stretching unbroken from prehistory to now buried under borders hidden in plain sight? In Japan, the Innu were declared a vanished race for over a century, till in 2008 they were finally recognized again as an indigenous people, not because of what was discovered in the ground, but because of what survived in the heart. The recognition came from within, from families who chose to reclaim language, ceremony, and memory. Could that happen in Sakhalin too? The answer may lie in the land. Sakhalin's interior remains one of the least studied regions in all of Northeast Asia. Its forests still hold secrets. Its mountains still echo with the voices of those who walked before maps, before states, before silence was forced upon them. Some believe that small communities may still live in those forgotten valleys, not visible, not organized, but still intact. And even if they don't, their story hasn't ended, because some legacies survive. Not through monuments or empires, but through endurance. A lullaby sung in a nearly dead language, a carving no one can yet translate. A fire built in a way passed down not through words, but through hands. So we're left with a question, a quiet one, but powerful. If the Innu of Sakhalin still remember who they are, will we remember to listen? And if we do, what else might we hear in the wind over the pine-covered cliffs? Voices still drift across the fog-wrapped rivers, waiting, just beyond the edge of forgetting. The Luwish culture, also known as the lost voices of the green frontier before the first empires rose along the Irrawaddy, and for scripts etched memory into stone, there was a voice soft, vanishing, an ancient speaking in the rhythm of wind through bamboo in the hush of cloud forests. A people who left no monuments, only whispers in forgotten syllables. This is not a history of kingdoms. This is the story of a silence. The Luwish culture, hidden in language, suspended in time. Deep in the remote hills where India bleeds, into Myanmar, a forest breathes with memories no one remembers. A land of jungle-thick slopes and mist-choked valleys ironical to Chin, rivers winding like old stories left untold. And within this tangled green lives a riddle. A culture that did not build cities or raise temples, but instead buried its essence in language, language now dissolving like morning fog. The Luwish, also known to linguists as the Asakian group, were never defined by political might, but by the soft endurance of their voice. Their language fragments now once spread across this region in a gentle arc, words passed down. Songs hummed quietly under breath, now spoken only in Sak and Kadu, two surviving tongues clinging to life in northern Myanmar. But even these are fading, carried by only a few elders who still recall lullabies whose meanings they themselves have forgotten. And yet, these languages do not fit easily into the known puzzle. Their grammar twists in strange directions. Their words hold, echoes not heard in any nearby dialect. Were the Luwish a branch of the great Tibeto-Burman migrations? Or something older, something forgotten? A people who whispered across this land before even the linguistic maps were drawn. When British linguists arrived in the 1800s, they found a language already retreating. It's too late to ask who the speakers were. It's too late to hear the full song. But scattered traces remain. Comparative studies show Sak and Kadu diverged from a much older mother tongue. This wasn't coincidence. It was memory stretched and torn by time, suggesting that once there was a larger whole, a culture that moved, fragmented, scattered through war, migration, or quiet retreat. And what of their own stories? They do not speak of conquest or rise. They speak of fire, of rivers crossed in haste, of homelands far to the northwest, now buried in clouds and borders. They speak of being part of a forest web of tribes, broken apart, absorbed, renamed, and still, the mystery deepens. In 2019, deep in northern Myanmar, linguists stumbled upon an undocumented dialect close to Sak, like a cousin glimpsed in a dream, but laced with words not heard anywhere else. Words inherited, they were told, from ancestors who came from the Sky Mountains. Not a map, but a metaphor, a place no longer knownly remembered in breath. Archaeologists, too, in nearby Naga and Chin regions, have uncovered strange sites, hilltop ruins, stone alignments, petroglyphs, no names, no clear authors. Could they be Luish? Or is this another voice lost to time? And perhaps that is the truth of the Luash, a people who were never meant to be found in stone, but in the ways they lived lightly, orally, intimately woven into the forest like vines around memory. When threatened, they didn't fight. They vanished, melting into green shadows, their stories dissolving into other tongues. Their names traded for survival. Some anthropologists now believe the Luish were among the first forest-dwelling cultures, displaced by agriculture, by kingdoms, by flood and fire. As empires rose along the Irrawaddy and Brahmaputra, the Luish moved further into silence. But silence is not absence, and fading is not forgetting. Because what if they are still here? What if their memory lives not as monuments, but as unrecognized patterns? In a child's song, in a prayer, whispered in a dialect no longer taught, in a ritual offering made in a hidden glade. What if the Luish never vanished, but became the silence between the words, in the shadowed highlands between nations? Beneath trees older than memory, a voice still waits. It may not speak loudly, it may not carry names or kings, but it carries time. And if we learn to listen to words misfiled, to rituals unnamed, we may yet hear the Luish speak again, not as ruins unearthed, but as the breath of something. Ancient, still moving beneath the forest canopy, still dreaming beneath the hush of the forgotten hills. The Bo people of China, high above roaring rivers, nailed into the faces of mist-draped cliffs. Ancient coffins hang in silence wooden cradles of the dead suspended between sky and stone. They do not belong to any modern people. They are echoes, whispers, of a lost civilization the earth tried to forget. We turn now east, far east, to the shrouded mountainlands of southern China. Here, where jagged cliffs rise like giants from the fog, and clouds slither through deep-cut canyons. Something strange and silent clings to the rock. Coffins, old and weather-worn, nestled in impossible places, suspended from the sheer stone walls that loom over valleys and rivers. Some rest in natural hollows, others balance on wooden beams driven into the vertical limestone, daring both gravity and time. These are no modern graves. They are the last testaments to a people who have vanished from the map, but not from thee. Mystery, they were called the Bo, who they truly were, remains unclear. Yet we know this much. They once lived across what is now Sichuan, Yunnan, and Guizhou provinces. They thrived in the rugged, mountainous borderlands of southern China, carving out a life in a landscape both beautiful and brutal. And now they are gonna not with a whisper, but with a silence so deep that only their skyward dead remain. Their culture is barely remembered. What fragments endure are scattered artifacts in museum drawers, legends shared in border villages, and of course, those haunting coffins gazing down from stone. And still, the question lingers. Who were the Bo? Their name surfaces in Chinese records as far back as the Zhou dynasty, ancient texts etched over 2,500 years ago. In some accounts, they appear as fierce warriors. In others, as artisans of uncommon skill. They were described by imperial scribes as one of the many barbarian tribes resisting the ever-expanding influence of the Chinese dynasties. But what truly sets the Bo apart is what they did with their dead. They did not bury their loved ones beneath the soil. They did not place them in temples or tombs. Instead, they raised them high, hoisting heavy coffins to the cliffs, balancing them on ledges, nestling them into caves, or wedging them into crevices. Some are so high that even today, modern climbers struggle to reach them, and still, no one knows exactly why. Was it to bring the spirits closer to the heavens? To keep the dead safe from wild animals or floods? Or was it a sacred gesture marking the presence of ancestors above, watching over the living? Even more perplexing is how they did it. Many of the coffins rest in places utterly unreachable, affixed to vertical walls with no visible paths or footholds. The beams, the platforms, the positions all speak of a people with not only skill, but purpose. These were not careless rituals. They were engineered with precision and courage, and then sometime in the 1400s, the Bo vanished. vanished not through slow decline or peaceful absorption, but, as legend tells, through fire and sword. Local stories speak of slaughter of a final campaign by the Ming dynasty to suppress a rebellion and erase the Bo from the highlands. Entire villages were burned. Lineages ended. Language lost. Culture wiped clean. It was a brutal silencing. A name pulled from the page. But the cliffs remained. The hanging coffins still cling to the rock, like wooden ghosts, peering down into green valleys, unmoving. They're what the Bo left behind, silent, solemn, defiantly there. And yet, are they truly gone? The story begins to twist again in the margins the corners where memory flickers. In hidden villages near the Sichuan-Guizhou border, some elders speak of ancestors who lived in the cliffs. Their children still follow burial practices that echo the Bo, placing coffins on high wooden stilts, raising the dead closer to the sky. In some hill tribes, spirals, bird motifs, and sun-like symbols appear in weavings and carvings designs that match patterns found on surviving Bo artifacts. Could these be more than coincidence? Could remnants of the Bo have survived hidden among neighboring peoples, their customs diluted but not gone? Even their language might echo faintly. Though officially extinct, researchers have uncovered oddities in the dialects spoken in these regions, tonal shifts and phrases that seem to belong nowhere. Words passed down through lullabies, chants, and forgotten songs spoken without knowledge of their origin. Could they be the final breath of the Bo tongue? Then come the field reports, quiet, unsettling. In the mid-20th century, several Chinese ethnographies heard whispers of remote mountain villages, unreachable by road, where burial platforms stood undisturbed atop cliffs. One account told of a small community whose elders claimed descent from those who walked above the valley. The report was never followed up. The trail went cold. The coffins remained. Today, dozens still hang, and more lie shattered beneath splintered relics of forgotten funerals. They are not marked with plaques. Tourists rarely visit. In many regions, locals refuse to touch them, considering the dead sacred or dangerous. What was buried with the Bo? What knowledge? Were they philosophers? Astronomers? Shamans whose cosmology lifted the soul between heaven and stone? Or were they simply a people whose identity was carved into wood, and cliff people whose very existence was their monument? They left behind no books, no codified laws, no carved myths, just the coffins, noble, weathered and silent, dangling, like secrets across the sky. But what if something more remains? What if in some cave still unexplored, the remnants of a story wait to be heard, a ritual preserved in secrecy, map etched in pattern and passed through generations? And what if the Bo never truly left? Perhaps their blood still runs quietly through the veins of those who live in the shadows of the cliffs. Perhaps their spirit lingers in the mist, in the wind, in the stillness of the Ridgul. As clouds gather once more over the stone faces of southern China, one cannot help but feel the eyes of the past watching from above. Are the Bo truly gone? Or are they waiting, hanging in time, high above the earth, whispering a story we've only just begun to hear? Still there? The Muisca Confederation before gold turned to legend. Before mist became memory, there was a place high above the clouds where a people lived not for riches, but for ritual, not for empire, but for meaning. This is the forgotten pulse of El Dorado, not a city, but a civilization wrapped in silence. We now drift across continents, crossing the globe to where the Andes climb like stairways into the sky. Here in the highlands of South America, where fog rolls over green savannas like slow breath, lies a land once ruled not by swords, by symbols, the land of the Muisca Confederation. To most, they are remembered as little more than the backdrop. To a myth, a shimmering illusion of gold whispered through the jungles by European tongues. But behind that myth, something still lingers. Not just treasure, but a deeper truth, quietly waiting beneath the surface. This was the Altiplano Cundiboyacense, vast and haunting plateau in the regions we now call Cundinamarca. The air here is thin, the kind that makes every breath feel earned and every sound feel sacred. Cliffs rise like forgotten temples. Lagoons lie still as sleeping gods. And the silence between them hums with age. It was in this quiet that one of the world's most enduring legends was born, El Dorado. But the story didn't begin with golden cities. No, El Dorado was never meant to be a place, not in the beginning. It began with a man, in the early 1500s. When Spanish chroniclers stumbled into these mist-veiled highlands, they heard stories, strange ones, not of towers or treasure hoards, but of a ritual. A man, a ruler, a priest-king of the Muisca, would coat his body in fine gold dust, step aboard a raft carved from native wood, and float to the center of a sacred Lake Guatavita. There, beneath the sun and the eyes of his people, he would offer shimmering figures, gold and emeralds, into the depths. Then he would dive beneath the water, returning clean. Reborn, this ceremony wasn't fantasy. It happened. The Spaniards found the remnants ornaments of dazzling gold, delicately cast animals, deities and abstract spirits, crafted by hands that understood not just metallurgy, but myth. One piece survives in brilliant defiance. The Muisca raft, a golden sculpture, now resting in Bogotá's Gold Museum, shows the very ceremony a raft, a gilded figure, attendants on either side. A frozen memory cast in fire and metal. But the Spanish, unable to understand a spiritual offering without conquest, twisted the tale. They imagined more, a city, a kingdom, an empire of gold hidden beyond the mist. They drained parts of the lake. They marched into the jungle. They searched until they could no longer stand. But what if they misunderstood everything? The Muisca Confederation wasn't an empire like the Inca or the Aztec. There were no imperial cities to seize. Single throne to topple. Instead, it was a network, a finely woven system of communities. Each linked not by domination, but by devotion. They mined salt from sacred hills. They grew crops in sun-kissed terraces. They crafted gold not for greed, but for gods. Their metallurgical mastery remains some of the finest in pre-Columbian history. And still, when the conquistadors came, they found no citadel to conquer. The Muisca were not centralized. Their sacred places were hidden. Lagoons, caves, mountain peaks, tucked behind clouds and cliffs. Hard to find. Harder still to hold. Some now believe. They did this on purpose. The Muisca knew how to vanish, not by fleeing, but by folding into the land itself. Even today, in small Andean villages, the Muisca still breathe. In words, in rituals, in quiet hands that drop offerings into forgotten lakes like Guatavita, Iguata, and Tota. They never disappeared. They just became the mist. And maybe it's the deeper meaning of El Dorado. Not a place, but a password, myth misunderstood. By foreign eyes, a mirror for the world's hunger. But also a veil for something else. Some scholars now believe the Spaniards mistook spiritual wealth for physical treasure. That the Muisca's greatest offerings weren't gold, but knowledge, the kind encoded in water, in stars, in silence, and there are hints unmapped ruins hidden deep in highland jungles. Steppe terraces overtaken by trees, dry canals once fed by sacred springs, signs of an ancient hydraulic mastery, traces of cities built not for war, but for worship. The lakes, too, still keep their secrets. Lake Guatavita's true depths have never been fully mapped. It is nearly perfectly circular. Some say it was formed by a meteor strike, a wound from the cosmos. A portal, perhaps? Divers have brought back ornaments, but many believe the most sacred pieces remain beyond reach. Beneath layers of silt, or tucked inside underwater caverns, no tool has yet touched. Could the Muisca have left behind more than treasure? Symbols. Astronomical markers. Sacred alignments built into the landscape like a code, and if so, who holds the key? There are whispered accounts of sites beyond known borders, places where only the initiated could go, where rituals like El Dorado weren't just performed, but preserved, protected, guarded. Even now, if you rise before dawn and stand at the edge of Lake Guatavita, as the fog lifts and the water mirrors the sky, you may feel it. A presence, a whisper, that the story isn't over, that the Muska didn't vanish. They waited, not buried, but folded into mountain and mist. Their voices, not silent, just distant, and maybe, if we listen, they will speak again. The DMT kingdom, long before the rise of Aksum, before the first Christian temples reached toward the sky. There was another kingdom, a name lost to most maps, a voice long silenced by time. Yet in the rugged highlands of East Africa, that voice still lingers, carried in stone, whispered through wind, waiting to be heard again. This is not just history. It's a secret buried in the mountains. This is the forgotten realm of these single quotes. Mount. We turn south, far south, to the arid highlands and sunlit plateaus of the Horn of Africa. Here among the rugged mountains and ancient stone terraces of what we now know as Eritrea and northern Ethiopia, rests the barely remembered echo of a kingdom that predates Aksum, the arrival of Christianity in this region. It was a civilization wrapped in shadows, a place whose story is written in riddles. Its name rarely spoken aloud, its sudden disappearance still unsettling to archaeologists and historians alike. This is the quiet mystery of the kingdom called Mounts. Scattered across the Tyra Highlands are strange, resilient ruins. They are cut with precision, aligned with intention. Fortress-like buildings, ancient irrigation systems, and carefully engineered terraces lie exposed. Beneath centuries of wind and unrelenting sun, carved into their surfaces are inscriptions. A script known as South Arabian Musnad, etched into stone slabs. These markings speak of literacy, of culture, and perhaps of contact with the Arabian Peninsula. And yet this is no Arabian land. These are African highlands, rich with their own rhythms of life, a land of deep history. Still waiting to be fully understood, the DMT kingdom, by most accounts, emerged around the 10th century BC and continued to flourish until roughly the 5th century BC. Many scholars consider it one of the earliest known complex societies in the Horn of Africa, a civilization that stood proudly long before Aksum began to cast its shadow. Its capital is believed to have been at Yeha, a site where the weathered remains of a towering temple still rise above the land, built from perfectly fitted ashlar blocks without the use of mortar. The structure's balance and durability echo techniques once used across ancient Yemen, but here the mystery deepens. The temple at Yeha shows clear signs of Sabian architectural influence, the same style seen in the ancient kingdom of Saba, across the Red Sea in what is now Yemen. But the real question remains, how far did that influence reach? Was Dumped simply a colony, carved out by South Arabian traders? Or was it something more, an independent civilization, borrowing architectural techniques from across the water but rooted in its own African soil? Could it have been a native kingdom, rising quietly? Before history knew how to record it, the answers remain frustratingly elusive. No royal tombs have yet been identified. No administrative records have been found. What we know of DMT is, pieced together from broken pottery, the foundations of temples and fortress walls, fragments scattered across the highlands. The architecture speaks of skill, of intention, of a people who knew how to shape stone, but the silence behind those walls, it's deafening. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, DMT disappears. By the 5th century BC, the inscriptions stop. No new temples are built. The archaeological signal fades into silence. Later, around the 1st century AD, another power rises nearby, the kingdom of Aksum, an empire that minted its own coins, developed a writing system, and became one of the most powerful forces in the ancient world. But in all the proud records of Aksum, there is not a single mention of DMT. No tribute, no continuity, no echo. What happened in the centuries between? Was domed a direct predecessor to Aksum, its structures absorbed, its elites folded into a new rising power? Or was it wiped away completely, its name removed, its memory erased? Some point to environmental changes, a shifting climate that may have made farming and survival unsustainable. Others see signs of political fragmentation, suggesting Damet may never have been a unified kingdom at all, but rather a confederation of regional powers that broke apart, or were swallowed by tribal conflicts. Still others propose that the disappearance may have been spiritual, a shift in religion where temples were abandoned, symbols erased, ancient dynasties forgotten in favor of new gods and new visions. And then, there are the theories that stretch the imagination. Some researchers note that the Horn of Africa remains one of the most underexplored regions in ancient archaeology. Political unrest, difficult terrain, and limited access have kept countless sites hidden, untouched by modern tools. Yet satellite imagery has revealed unusual patterns, potential settlements, walls, and road systems beneath the ground, silent outlines that may still hold the answers. Could it be that beneath layers of sediment and silence lie the ruins of a royal city, a lost necropolis, a hidden library waiting to be found? Could the forgotten kings of DMT still be waiting for their names to be spoken? Others believe the kingdom never truly disappeared, that it lives on, transformed in local oral traditions and hidden rituals, in the languages and lineages of highland communities. Some of these ancient stories speak of a forgotten age, an era of stone builders, of priest kings, who mastered the secrets of water and sky. Are these just myths? Or are they distant echoes, warped by time, but rooted in truth? And what of the temple at Yeha? Despite its age, it still stands, unshaken. By time, unmoved by weather, untouched by war, its stones remain, set without mortar, with precision and patience that seem almost otherworldly. Was it just a temple? Or was it once part of something more, a vast sacred complex whose meaning has been lost to time? We may never know. But as the sun sets across the highlands of Ethiopia, casting long shadows over fields of basalt and granite, there is still something in the air. Not absence, not ruin, but presence. Was DMT an empire without memory? A civilization? Wiped clean from the record? Or is it still out there? Its story hidden in stone, its name not lost, but whispered, waiting for someone to finally hear it. In the silence of the highlands, the past has not vanished. It waits. The Lemko people as the winds drift through the towering Carpathian peaks. They carry more than just the scent of pine, they stir a memory. A song, a presence that was never truly lost. This is not a disappearance buried beneath ruins or ancient sands, but one written in exile, in broken silence, and in the fragile breath of memory. In these mountains, something still lingers, a name barely spoken, a people once scattered like mist. This is the mystery of the Lemko. We stay among the mountains, but time shifts. Our footsteps now echo in a more recent disappearance, one not caused by the conquests of long-forgotten empires, nor hidden under centuries of soil. This vanishing lives within memory itself, carved into stories told quietly. And the ache of those who remember. Our path winds deeper into the Carpathians, through veiled valleys, steep pine-covered slopes, and wooden churches nestled gently. In the creases of forgotten land, this is the homeland of the Lemko people. Once their villages crowned the ridgelines of southeastern Poland, northeastern Slovakia, and western Ukraine, a borderland where cultures touched but never fully blended. Today that land rests quietly. Crumbling cottages peek from beneath wild thickets. Wooden gravestones, carved by hands long gone, lean under moss and snow. And the names that once marked the maps have blurred into shadows. But if you listen, really listen, the voice of a vanished identity still moves through the wind. Who were the Lemko? At first glance, they might seem like one of many small Slavic ethnic groups scattered across Eastern Europe. But when you look closer, the mystery deepens. Their dialect is East Slavic. Some call it a form of Ukrainian, while others insist it's something all its own. Their churches follow the Byzantine rite. It belonged fully neither to Orthodox nor Catholic traditions. Their customs blend Christian ritual with the echo of something more ancient. Pagan fire festivals, sacred forest groves, songs that pulse. With the rhythm of sky and soil, their architecture is unlike any other. Wooden churches with 3 domes, painted in deep greens and piercing blues, standing quietly against the mountain sky. Even their embroidery tells stories. Geometric patterns that resemble symbols trace back to Scythian art. And their folklore, tales of wandering saints, chanted hills, and watchers in the trees, weave together a culture as haunting as it is unique. But perhaps the most profound mystery of the Lemko is not just what they left behind, but how they disappeared. For centuries, the Lemko lived quietly, bound to the rhythm of their highland villages stretched across the Carpathian Arc. They were farmers, shepherds, craftspeople, enduring the rise and fall of empires. The Habsburgs, the shifting borders of Poland, Czechoslovakia, Ukraine, and then came the rupture. In the wake of World War II, in the haze of fear and forced realignment, the Lemko became a target. In 1947, under the sweeping hand of Operation Vistula, Polish communist government accused them of sympathizing with Ukrainian separatists. Over 140,000 Lemkos and other Ukrainians were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands. Scattered across the western and northern regions of Poland, many resettled into villages, vacated by displaced Germans. The break was violent, families torn apart, their language silenced, sacred spaces abandoned, and yet a flicker remained in. The years that followed, scholars, linguists, and descendants began tracing the outline of a people who never fully vanished. Songs recorded in exile remembered mountain paths, never walked again. Folktales told in low kitchens whispered of a land that once breathed, that may still breathe. And quietly, a return began. Lemko festivals once again take place among the highlands. Churches have been mended, forgotten graves have been cleared of overgrowth, and still, questions linger. Where did the Lemko truly come from? Some historians place them among the Ruzin family, Eastern Slavs who settled the Carpathians in the medieval period. Others whisper of an even older lineage, one that wove itself into the early Slavic migrations, merging as it crossed the mountain passes. Among the Lemko themselves, legends speak of a different origin. They say their blood is older, more ancient, is drawn from a time before the world took shape. Some tales describe forest ancestors, beings who taught them how to live in harmony with hill and tree. And then there are the symbols. In certain Lemko villages, carvings in wood, patterns in cloth bear a striking resemblance to solar cults of pre-Christian Europe. Scholars have found Lemko songs that seem to encode astronomical patterns, moon phases, solstices, alignments with nearby peaks. Are these relics of a spiritual system that survived, hidden beneath layers of Christian custom, clues buried so subtly they've gone unnoticed for centuries? The artifacts only deepen the enigma. Bronze amulets shaped like birds. Pottery, unlike that of neighboring peoples. Strange items recovered from Lemko cemeteries and deserted homesteads that don't quite match known traditions. Could these be the remnants of a lost Carpathian civilization? Or echoes of a cultural memory far deeper than we understand? And perhaps the most haunting mystery of all, did all the Lemko truly leave? The Carpathians remain vast, their valleys in many places, untouched by roads or wires, believe that small hidden Lemko communities survived the deportations tucked in folds of forest and mist, still speaking their dialect in whispers, still keeping their rights. In silence, there are stories of hikers who, while crossing abandoned trails, hear chanting in crumbling churches, of elders who appear briefly, then vanish, speaking a language not quite Polish, not quite Ukrainian. Could these be the last, guardians of a memory the world forgot? The Lemko story is not one of ruin, but of quiet resilience. A people carved from mist and mountain, displaced, overlooked, but never fully gone. And as the fog gathers, once more, along the ridges of the Beskid range, we're left to wonder, what else sleeps in the forests of the Carpathians? What voices still walk the wooded paths in forms we no longer recognize? Perhaps the Lemko are still there, not vanished, just waiting in the shadows of the pines. And as those shadows slip behind us, soft, quiet, breathing, the Lemko spirit still drifts, through wind, through earth, and through the silence that never truly forgot them. The Yuzi Confederation, there are winds that sweep across the steppes of Central Asia that seem to remember more than we do. They whisper of migrations long forgotten, of peoples who walked with the clouds and vanished into legend. These winds pass over the deserts of Xinjiang, cross the towering Pamir Mountains, and down into the green highlands of Bactria. Somewhere along those ancient trails, a name lingers, faint, elusive, but never fully gone. The Yuzi, they come to us from the misted edge of memory. Their story doesn't live in grand ruins or monuments carved with their name. No libraries, no written words in their own tongue. Yet somehow the mark they left spreads wide across the canvas of Asia's history, like a shadow flickering just beyond the reach of certainty. Our journey begins far back. The grasslands of Gansu, in what is now western China, was around the 2nd millennium BC, when a pastoral people, likely of Indo-European origin, known as the Yuzi, thrived there. They herded animals, traded jade, and lived at the crossroads between the rising dynasties of ancient China and the untamed lands that stretched endlessly westward. In the chronicles of early Chinese historians, they were remembered as riders, of great skill, draped in felt and fur. They lived not in palaces, but in mobile camps, shifting with the rhythm of the seasons, always moving, always adapting. But in the 2nd century BC, their world collapsed. A fierce nomadic power, the Gongnu, surged out of the north, conquering all in their path. The Yuzi were struck down. Their leader was killed. And in one chilling detail, his skull was said to have been fashioned into a drinking vessel. Their confederation shattered. One branch, later called the Lesser Yuzi, fled southward, disappearing into the remote heights of Tibet, swallowed into the silence of unwritten history. The others, the Greater Yuzi, began a long, sweeping migration across the rooftop of the world. But where did they go? The next trace appears in Bactria, a lush mountainous region nestled between present-day Afghanistan and Tajikistan. By the 1st century BC, the Yuezi had risen again. It conquered the remnants of the Greco-Bactrian kingdom and laid the foundation for what would soon become one of Asia's great dynasties, the Kushan Empire. Under Kushan rule, a vast domain emerged, one that bridged Central Asia with northern India. Their influence spread like fire along the Silk Road. Cities bloomed, trade routes pulsed with life. Coinage bearing the faces of kings like Kanishka the Great was found from Rome to China, and art. Oh, the art bloomed in Gandhara, where Hellenistic styles danced with Indian spiritual themes, birthing a new visual language of Buddhism that remains iconic to this day. Languages coexisted: Sanskrit, Greek Bactrian, and Prakrit. Buddhist teachings flourished under Kusian patronage, traveling north into China and Tibet, changing the religious map of Asia forever. But their ascent, though luminous, did not last. By the 3rd century AD, the Kushans began to fracture. Their lands fell into the hands of new powers, the Sassanids, the Hephalites, and later the Huns. And once more, the Yuezi faded from the foreground of history. Or did they? The real mystery of the Yuezi lies not just in what we know, but in what still evades us. So many questions remain unanswered. Where did they come from before their first appearance in Chinese records? Were they a single people, or a coalition of tribes, bound together by survival? Their name may still echo in the distance. Some believe it survives in the Jat communities of India and Pakistan, groups that claim lineage from Central Asian tribes. Others point to the mysterious Tocharian people, whose well-preserved mummies in the Tarim Basin display European features. Woolen garments and ties to Indo-European languages. Could the Yuezi and the Tocharians be connected? Some scholars think so, but without certainty. The theory remains a soft outline in the mist. The enigma only grows when we realize how little has been unearthed. Unlike the Han or the Parthians, The Uezi left behind no cities that bear their name, no vast monuments, almost no inscriptions written by their own hands. Nearly everything we know about them was written by others, Chinese historians, Roman traders, later Buddhist monks. It's as if they passed through time like ghosts, always present, always impactful, yet never quite caught. And that opens a door. Could some remnant of the Uezi still exist? Tucked in the remote valleys of Central Asia? Hidden in the customs of a forgotten tribe? Preserved in an untranslated Buddhist verse, resting in a monastery somewhere no one has searched? No. Is it possible that their legacy survives not in stone, but in story? In legends passed down through generations of travelers from the East, bearers of horses, knowledge, and the quiet light of peace. In the high valleys of the Pamir Mountains, there are whispers of ancestors who came from lands unknown, carrying strange customs, sacred rituals, and old wisdom. Genetic studies in these regions reveal strands consistent with ancient Indo-European populations. Linguistic fragments, certain root words, grammatical forms, surface occasionally, but never offer a full picture. Just like everything else about the Uezi, the answers always seem just out of reach. And then there is the land. Vast, shifting, unforgiving. Central Asia remains one of the least fully explored corners of the ancient world. Here, mountains can conceal civilizations. Deserts can preserve secrets for 1,000 years. New finds emerge slowly: coins, inscriptions, wall paintings. Each one adds a thread to the tapestry. Yet still, the full image eludes us, so we're left to wonder, did the Uezi truly vanish? Absorbed into the flow of empires and migrations? Or is their story still unfolding, hidden under centuries of dust, waiting to be seen by eyes that know where to look? Could it be that in a forgotten monastery, an untouched cave, or the dialect of a fading village, some part of them still speaks? Could their greatest lesson, resilience, migration, adaptation, still echo in the lives of their descendants?
Oh.
The wind still carries their name across the steppes, but when we listen, only silence answers. And as the golden sun dips behind the mountains of Central Asia, perhaps that silence is not an ending, but an invitation to search again. The Hadza people in the golden silence of northern Tanzania, as the first light touches the grasslands and acacia, leaves whisper in the morning breeze. The land itself seems to remember. We're here in the cradle of the great Rift Valley. Time shimmers, not as a memory, but as a presence. Beneath these open skies and beside the glinting waters of Lake Ayasi, there lives a people whose steps echo not just through the earth, but through the origins of all of us. They are the Hadza, and they may never have truly left the rhythm of our beginnings. They are not an empire. They've built no palaces, raised no kingdoms. And yet the Hadza remains something perhaps more profound, a living pulse of humanities. Most ancient memory? They are among the last true hunter-gatherers on Earth, and perhaps the closest living reflection of how our ancestors moved, thought, and lived tens of thousands of years ago. But who are they really? How have they remained? So quietly, so completely, apart from the great wave of modern civilization. To walk with the Hadza is to step outside of time itself. They leave no paper trail. They follow no central leader. They build no permanent homes. There are no fields, no herds, no storerooms. Only the land, the sun, and the present moment. Dawn, they rise and begin the day's pursuit, chasing baboons through tangled brush, digging roots from the dry soil, moving with the rhythm of animals and trees. Their bows are strung with sinew from giraffes. Their arrows, sharpened and poisoned, are crafted with care. Life for the Hadza flows with the patterns of wind, the song of birds, the fruiting of trees, the wandering of game, and then there is their language. Linguists have puzzled over it for decades. With clicks and glottal stops, it bears a resemblance to the Khoisan tongues of southern Africa, and yet it is related to none of them. The Hadza language stands alone, an isolated drift in a sea of change, a voice echoing from a time before language had branches, and that is where the true mystery begins. Because the Hadza are not just a small group refusing the modern world. They are a continuity, an ancient enigma. Genetic studies suggest that their lineage may stretch back as far as 50,000 years, one of the oldest continuous populations on Earth. And yet, no one can say with certainty where they came from, unlike the surrounding groups. The Hadza don't speak of migration or conquest. Their stories tell of emergence, of simply being. Born from the land itself, shaped by volcanic soil and lake reeds. They did not arrive. They arose, and the evidence whispers in agreement. Stone tools unearthed near Lake Iasi, some dating to the Middle Stone Age, match those still used by Hadza hunters today. The same shape, the same craft, the same purpose. Is it possible that the Hadza aren't merely preserving an old lifestyle, but embodying a way of being that stretches all the way back to humanity's dawn? And if so, what knowledge do they carry that we have forgotten? Anthropologists study them for clues to human cognition, diet, and cooperation. But beyond the data lies something subtler, a feeling. That the Hadza move in the quiet space between past and future, not as relics, but as reminders. Unlike the rest of us who have marched into complexity, the Hadza have remained anchored in simplicity, not in ignorance but in presence. A different kind of wisdom, and yet even here, there are riddles. Satellite imagery reveals paths hidden deep. Within the Yida Valley, traces of forest trails. Stone rings far from known Hadza camps. Were these ancient Hadza sites? Or the ghost steps of a sister culture? One that once shared the land and faded into myth. Stranger still are the stories told by nearby pastoralists of barefoot people who vanish into the trees, silent, unseen, speaking no language known. To others, myths perhaps or something more. Could there be Hadza clans still living uncounted? Hidden in thickets beyond satellite reach, their fires flickering beneath sacred fig trees, their songs carried only by wind? Some have suggested that the Hadza's refusal of agriculture and permanent homes is not just cultural, but philosophical. Choice, a way of life where ownership means nothing, where hierarchy dissolves, where nature is not controlled, but accompanied. If this is true, then perhaps the Hadza are not only an ancient people, but a quiet rebellion against the very notion of civilization, and yet even that view may not do them justice. To paint them as frozen in time is to misunderstand them. They are not fossils. They are human, living, choosing. Some Hadza youth swear watches travel to town. Others return to the wild, shedding modernity like a skin that doesn't belong. This adaptability, this quiet fluidity is what has allowed them to endure. Still, their future trembles. Encroaching farmland, climate stress, and political pressure narrow their lands each year. Governments, tourists, and anthropologists come with questions, cameras, and plans. But the Hadza's erosion is not always visible, not a conquest, but a slow, quiet disappearance. And so we ask, are we witnessing the final chapter of an ancient people, or are we simply scratching the surface of something deeper? Could it be that in the heart of Tanzania, under the same trees where early humans once learned to stand, to speak, to dream, there walks a people who never stopped, listening to the earth? And if so, what wisdom do they still carry that the rest of us have long since forgotten? The Shasu of Yahweh. Beneath the sun-scorched ridges of the Negev and Sinai, the land breathes dry and ancient. Winds stir the dust with whispers, curling through jagged canyons and casting long shadows across a landscape older than memory. These deserts, now still and forbidding, were once alive, not with cities or stone monuments, but with quiet movement. The soft rhythm of feet on sand, tents rising like ghosts in the wind, fires flickering beneath a canopy of stars. Among these forgotten wanderers were the Shasu. Their name first emerges in the inscriptions of ancient Egypt, etched as early as the 15th century BC. But the Shasu were no kingdom, no empire of carved walls and hierarchies. They were a fluid, shifting confederation of semi-nomadic tribes. They moved through the borderlands of Canaan, Edom, and the southern Levant, across what we now know as Jordan, Israel, and Egypt. Their very name meant those who walk on foot, a title that speaks to their way of life, their elusiveness, and their quiet defiance of permanence. They left few visible traces, no great cities, no temples, but their presence was undeniable, especially to the powerful kingdoms they bordered. To the Egyptians, the Shasu were both a threat and a mystery, worthy of caution, worthy of respect. On the temple walls of Karnak, pharaohs recorded their campaigns into Shasu lands. These territories were difficult, the enemies scattered and swift. In the desert itself, a fierce and silent protector to those who knew its secrets. But among these hieroglyphs, single name shimmers with mystery, a fragment of text that has stirred centuries of wonder and debate, the Shasu of Yahweh. In an inscription from the reign of Amenhotep III, 14th century BC, Egyptian scribes recorded a group of Shasu dwelling in a land, or perhaps under a deity, called Yahweh. The phrase reads simply, the land of the Shasu of Yahweh. For theologians and historians alike, those words carry weight. Some call it coincidence. Others, a whisper of something far greater. Could this be the earliest written reference to Yahweh, the name of the God later worshipped by the Israelites? And if so, who were the first to speak it? Mainstream scholars tread cautiously. The similarity between Yahweh and YHW is compelling, but not conclusive. It may have referred to a place, not a god, or to a tribe whose deity shared a name with one who would later change the spiritual map of the world. And yet, the puzzle pieces begin to align. The lands associated with the Shasu of Yahweh overlap with the regions many believe were home to the earliest forms of Israelite faith. In those early days, there were no stone temples, no cities, only tribes, scattered in the wilderness, worshipping a single, powerful deity, not through ritual, but through reverence. Their lives mirrored the Shasu, pastoral, impermanent, guided, not by law, but by relationship, personal, raw. Sacred could monotheism itself, the seed of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, have been born not in the palaces of priests, but in the silence of desert wanderers. Could the Shasu have been the first to whisper the divine name, long before scrolls were written, before prophets stood before nations? We cannot say for sure. The Shasu left no scriptures, no canon. Unlike the Israelites, their words were not preserved in ink. Unlike the Canaanites, they built no lasting cities. Over time, the name faded from stone. Their identity absorbed into others, perhaps the Midianites, or the early Hebrews themselves. And yet, not all was lost. Among the Bedouin oral stories, still breathe life into the mountains east of the Jordan. Tales of ancient tribes who wandered with visions in their dreams, who followed a divine presence not seen, not named, but known. In the hush of night, beneath stars too bright to be. Modern? Some say the sacred name is still spoken, not in temples. But in whispers, modern ethnographies have caught faint echoes, stories passed down through generations. Stories of people who did not seek to rule or conquer, but to follow. Who spoke to the wind and listened for answers in silence. Worshipped, not through gold or altar, but through awe. And something else remains. Vast parts of Sinai and southern Jordan remain untouched, unexplored. Remote cliffs, hidden caves, silent chambers carved by time. In recent years, archaeologists have uncovered ancient petroglyphs, forgotten burial grounds, and signs of old migration routes, corridors in the stone where a people might have. Past, unseen, and unremembered, some fringe thinkers whisper that the Shasu may still linger in secret villages, quiet lineages, in fragments of prayer spoken only within families. Others believe they are gone. But their spirit, their idea lives on. Perhaps they needed no monuments, because what they carried was not meant to be buried in stone. Perhaps the Shasu of Yahweh were the first to feel the pulse of something sacred, something unseen, a divine presence, old as the hills, carried not in doctrine but in dust. And so we ask, did these desert nomads leave behind more than a name? Did they carry the first breath of a faith that would stretch across centuries? Is their story hidden still beneath the cliffs of Edom? In the folds of forgotten scripture, in the rustling silence of the desert wind? We don't know, but we do know this. There once walked a people free of empire, led by no king, guided only by something deeper. They built no altars. But perhaps they saw the divine more clearly than any, and as the desert winds blow still across the old lands, perhaps the Shasu still walk unseen, unheard, but not forgotten, just the Shardana. From the rivers of Mesoamerica to the open breath of the sea, our path now sails east across the Mediterranean's shimmering skin, to a land where turquoise waves kiss rugged stone. Here on the island of Sardinia, where the wind howls through craggy peaks and whispers through forgotten ruins, a mystery stirs. The land is wild. The coast's lined with ancient stone, and hidden in its bones is the fading heartbeat of a people long veiled in silence. They were the Shardana, one of the most elusive civilizations ever to walk the ancient world. Their legacy lingers in stone, if not in story. Across Sardinia's untamed hills, they left behind towers, mirage carved from basalt, rising like fossilized echoes of another time. Some stand alone. Others gather in clusters, surrounded by the outlines of what were once thriving villages. These megalithic towers, dating back to the 2nd millennium BC, speak with the weight of permanence. And yet, no scrolls remain to explain them, no king lists, no recorded histories. Only the towers, still watching, the Shardana's name. First appears not in their own land, but etched into the stone records of Egypt. They do not arrive as merchants, but as warriors in the 14th and 13th centuries BC, during the reigns of pharaohs like Ramesses II and Merneptah. The Shardana appear in temple reliefs and battle scenes. They are among the dreaded sea peoples, a confederation of maritime raiders, who struck terror across the eastern Mediterranean with horned helmets, round shields, and disciplined formations. They moved like ocean storms, fierce, precise, relentless. The Egyptians fought them, and then hired them. The Shardana became both enemy and ally, mercenaries and invaders, shadows with swords. But where had they come from? The question has haunted scholars for generations. Their name, Shardana, echoes Sardinia. Their weapons and armor mere Bronze Age finds on the island. Their fingerprints in the form of Niraj, bronze figurines, and fortified outposts suggest a society both martial and advanced. Could Sardinia have been there, home all along, or was it only a remnant? A final stronghold of a seafaring people who once ranged far wider than we know? No answer has yet quieted the debate. Some scholars believe the Shardana hailed from Anatolia or the Levant driven westward by collapse, drought, or war, before anchoring themselves in Sardinia's rocky shores. Others argue the reverse, that they emerged from Sardinia itself and launched raids across the sea from coastal strongholds. Like ghost ships in the night, the evidence is scattered, incomplete, infuriating. We have their weapons, bronze swords and ceremonial blades, their helmets stylized and strange, but no written word. No native inscriptions, no recovered language, no texts or libraries, only scattered artifacts, and their name. Recorded not by their own hands, but by the scribes of distant empires. And so we're left to ask, how could a people so skilled, so formidable, challengers of empires, vanish without a voice? Perhaps the answer lies in their nature. Some believe the Shardana were never meant to be static. Not a nation, but a class. A maritime warrior elite, seafarers whose power came from movement, not settlement. Perhaps they left no temples because they followed no gods carved in stone. Perhaps they built no palaces because their kingdoms were tides and wind. Their homes may have been temporary. Their stories spoken, not written. Their allegiances fluid, following the currents of war, trade, and survival. But others offer a grander vision. Fringe theories whisper that the Shardana were part of a forgotten pan-Mediterranean world, a cultural web that predated the classical age, one whose ruins remain in broken pieces, the Niraj of Sardinia, the Talayots of the Balearic Islands, the Cyclopean walls of Mycenae, the vanished ports of the Levant. Could these have been threads in the same tapestry, civilization hidden? Behind the gaps in written history, there are clues not just in stone, but in story, in Sardinia's villages. Old folk tales speak of giants, ancient builders of stone towers. Others speak of ancestors who came not from land, but from sea. And even now, certain rituals persist, processions that mimic military drills. Dances performed around megaliths whose meanings have been lost, but whose rhythms remain. The name Shardana is never spoken, but their shape is still felt. And perhaps the island itself guards their secrets. Geologists note that much of Sardinia remains unexcavated. Forested highlands, remote mountain valleys, underwater shelves along the coast, all largely unexplored. Could the key to the Shardana lie buried in a forgotten cave or submerged beneath the Mediterranean waiting? Could their language, their burial rites, their last stronghold, still be out there? And what became of them? Did they vanish in the chaos of the Bronze Age collapse like so many others? Or did they adapt, absorbed by the empires that followed, the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, the Romans? Did they retreat into the wilds of their island, becoming nameless ancestors of the people who live there today? No one knows. But on Sardinia's highlands, when the dusk falls and the wind howls against basalt towers, it's easy to imagine them, the clang of bronze on stone, the glint of a horned helmet, the rhythmic beat of oars against the sea. Who were the Shardana? Warriors, builders, raiders, or something else entirely? Perhaps they're not gone, just hidden, not lost, but waiting for us to read the waves, the ruins, and the silence. More carefully, and in that silence between what we remember and what we've forgotten, they might still be watching. The Nittaewo. As the dust of Quivira and Sibylla drifts away across the forgotten plains, our journey turns once more, this time to a land veiled in green. A place where temples sleep beneath vines and time is measured in whispers. Welcome to Sri Lanka, tropical, ancient, and tangled in myth. A place where history rises and collapses in layers, and where, if the stories are true, something far stranger once walked beside us. In the overgrown corners of this island long before modernity reached its shores, elders spoke of a people, not quite human, not quite beast. The Nittaewo, the Sinhala and Vita peoples. Among the island's most ancient ethnic groups, the Nittaewo were not fantasy. They were remembered. Described as short, upright beings covered in reddish hair, they were said to move with an eerie silence, haunting the night and guarding their territory with clawed hands and animal fury. Some tell of them using crude tools, hunting, sleeping in caves. Others recall more chilling details, that they had no language, feared fire, and that their final days ended in blood and stone. But who or what were they? You don't begin with science but with memory, in Sri Lanka's eastern jungles, especially near the remote regions of Mahayangana and the Danagala Plateau. The story lingers and whispers passed from grandparent to child. The tale goes like this. Long ago, after years of escalating conflict, the Veda people cornered the last group of Nittaewo, perhaps 20 in all, into a rocky cleft in the hills. There they sealed the entrance with boulders, leaving them trapped inside, buried alive. A brutal and final silence. Is this only a tale to frighten children? Or could it be a fading memory of something real? In the 19th century, British officials in colonial Ceylon began to notice the story. One of the most curious was Hugh Neville, a civil servant and ethnologist who spent years immersed in Sri Lankan culture. He recorded consistent reports from different regions, descriptions that never seemed to vary. Creature, human-like yet other, roughly 4 feet tall with shortened limbs, elongated arms, no language, and a deep fear of fire. Even Judge Frederick Lewis, another colonial authority, documented these accounts in published papers. Local informants swore their elders had seen the beings with their own eyes. For decades, mainstream thinkers dismissed it all as folklore. misremembered encounters with wildlife, confused retelling of tribal encounters, a cultural shadow, not a biological one, but something didn't quite fit. The consistency, the specificity, the plainness of how the stories were told, not with mythic flair, but with quiet certainty, as if reporting a forgotten neighbor, not a legend. And so the mystery grew. Could the Nittaewo have been a remnant of an archaic human lineage? Some researchers suggest a stunning possibility, that these creatures may have been related to Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbits of Indonesia, whose remains were uncovered on the island of Flores in 2003. These ancient hominins stood between 3 and 4 feet tall, had small brains, used tools, and may have lived as recently as 12,000 years ago. The parallels are striking. Could the Nittaewo have been a cousin species isolated in Sri Lanka's deep forests surviving? Into the 18th or even 19th century, their presence known only to those who shared the land with them? Or were they something else entirely? There are older, darker accounts among Veda storytellers, tales that suggest the Nittaewo were more beast than man. They couldn't speak, but screeched. That they slept in trees, leapt across ravines, moved with such eerie speed and grace that even seasoned hunters couldn't track them. Is it possible they were an unknown species of primate, a bipedal hominid, neither fully human nor fully ape native to the island, now extinct? Or perhaps still hidden beneath the emerald canopy no satellite has yet pierced. Even in the modern age, Sri Lanka holds its secrets tight. Much of the eastern interior remains unexplored. Rugged jungle, limestone caverns, steep ravines, dense foliage. Even today, a few venture far beyond the well-trodden paths. Expeditions, both amateur and professional, have reported strange finds, claw marks on high tree trunks, samples of reddish hair, and footprints that match no known species. Nothing conclusive, yet, but nothing that can be easily explained. Skepticism reigns in academic circles. Without skeletal remains, without photographs, without DNA, the Nittaewo remain outside the walls of accepted science. But deep in Sri Lanka's forests, where the air buzzes thick with insects and shadow, belief still breathes. What if they are still there? Not as ghosts, but as survivors. Living in ravines no foot has crossed in generations, caves where light has never reached. Memories of the old, those who may have glimpsed them once, then chose never to speak again. Sometimes, the line between history and legend blurs not because truth is unclear, but because we've forgotten how to listen. Sri Lanka listens. And in those tangled forests where the canopy closes like a curtain, the Nittaewo may not be lost, but simply waiting, and perhaps the last to see them didn't realize it would be the final time anyone ever would. The Moriori of the Chatham Islands, beyond the eastern shores of New Zealand, where the vast Pacific breathes across forgotten waters, there lies a scattered chain of mist-veiled islands. The Chatham Islands, remote, windswept, and wrapped in salt and silence. Here, where the sea shapes every edge and the fog lingers like memory, lived a people nearly erased from time. The Moriori, keepers of peace in a world shaped by war. The land feels untouched, ancient, its beaches whisper. Beneath driftwood carried by oceans from realms unseen. Inland, the hills roll in soft green curves, blanketed in ferns and sculpted trees bowed. By constant wind, there are no great rivers, no towering peaks, only the wide breadth of sea and sky and the echo of something that once was. For centuries, the Moriori lived in deep and quiet isolation, separated from the Moriori of New Zealand's mainland by more than 500 miles of open ocean. They forged a life apart. What emerged from that distance was something rare, a civilization rooted not in conquest, but in restraint. They'd come from Polynesia, likely from New Zealand's South Island, sometime between 1200 and 1500 AD, but the moment they reached the Chathams, something shifted. A choice was made, returning. Rather than continuing the patterns of conflict so often seen in the ancient world, they embraced a new way of life. one shaped by Nuniko's law, a sacred code of nonviolence, passed down by a revered ancestor. According to legend, he had seen too much bloodshed. From that moment on, his people would never again take a life. They kept that promise. Through generations, disputes were settled not by weapons, but by consensus, ritual, or exile. No war. No blood feuds. Just a quiet and extraordinary balance between land, sea, and one another. A culture of harmony flourished, not loud or grand, but deeply rooted. And at the very edge of the world. But how long can peace survive, wrapped in isolation? In 1835, that fragile world unraveled. Two groups of Mbori warriors, Ngit, Mutanga and Ngi Tama, arrived by a hijacked European ship, bringing with them muskets, slavery, and a worldview forged in very different fires. The Moriori did not fight. True to their law, they welcomed the newcomers, shared food, sought coexistence, but they were met with violence. Over the years that followed, hundreds of Moriori were killed. The survivors were enslaved, their language banned, their traditions stamped into silence. And for a time it was widely believed that they had vanished. The last peaceful society on Earth had been wiped away quietly, completely. But that, too, was a myth. In the quiet shadow of the 20th century, the descendants of the Moriori began to rise. Words once forbidden were whispered again. Hidden identities were reclaimed. The old chants, the old rituals, resurfaced from beneath generations of silence. Today, the Moriori are no longer considered extinct. They're resurgent, recognized, still here, still walking the land their ancestors once called home. But even in survival, questions remain. Not just about the violence, but about what came before. How did a society so radically peaceful arise? Was Nuniko's law born from ancient trauma? Or was it something older, a spiritual philosophy, not a reaction, but a revelation? Echoes of that same worldview survive elsewhere, in forgotten corners of the world where no one's yet looked. The Chatham Islands remain largely quiet. Beyond the restored Mori and scattered towns lie untouched valleys, wild coasts, and stones that speak only when the wind is right. Are there ancient Moriori sites still hidden? Stone carvings? Burial grounds? Sacred trees where secrets were once whispered in the language of the sea? In recent decades, archaeologists have uncovered new traces, signs of a complex and highly adapted culture, advanced fishing systems, storage pits, and hints of organized horticulture. Petroglyphs etched into coastal stone, abstract and ancient, but what do they mean? Are they maps? Star charts? Markers of journeys no longer remembered. The Moriori language itself, now being slowly revived, holds grammar and words found nowhere else in the Polynesian world. Is this the result of long isolation, or something deeper? Connection to roots that reach further back than we've dared imagine? Some fringe scholars suggest an even older link, that the Moriori may hold threads connecting not just to Polynesia, but to forgotten migrations across the Pacific, or to earlier peoples whose voyages were lost to time. Most experts remain cautious, but this much is certain. The isolation of the Chathams preserves more than just silence. It preserves mystery. Could the Moriori be more than a remote offshoot of Polynesian culture? Could they be a living remnant of a much older seafaring world, one that predates the Mbori, even predates the great Polynesian expansion itself? And if so, what might still lie beneath the earth? In the seeds first planted by hands we no longer know, or in the quiet DNA of the land waiting to tell its story. The waves still break. On those lonely shores, the trees still bend with the wind. And in that silence, something still lingers. Perhaps not lost, just waiting. The Tassadai tribe, far beyond the mist-veiled hills of Mindan now. In the southern reaches of the Philippines, there lies a forest so thick, so untouched, it breathes like a world apart. The canopy folds the sky in green shadows. Bamboo groves creak in the damp breeze, and beneath it all, the earth is quiet, holding tight a story that would one day astonish the world. In 1971, a whisper rose from the jungle. a whisper of a people, unknown and unseen, hiding garments made not of fabric, but of orchid bark, speaking a tongue no scholar had ever recorded, living in caves, hunting with tools shaped from stone and wood. They called them the Tosadai to the world. It was as if time had cracked open, and from its deepest layers, a piece of the Paleolithic had slipped through. They were said to be untouched by modernity. A tribe living as humans may have lived thousands of years ago, with no words for war, no knowledge of cities or machines, just the rhythm of the rainforest and the softness of a language with no term for violence. Photographs spread quickly. Wide-eyed children, barefoot and gentle, stood beneath jungle vines, holding tools chipped from rock. Their feet bore no calluses, their voices held no bitterness, and so the world watched, captivated. Anthropologists, journalists, and curious officials descended upon the site. The caves they found were perched in the limestone cliffs, cool and dry, overlooking a rainforest valley so wild it seemed made to keep secrets. It's a barrier of trees and time, yet from the very beginning, something felt strange. No neighboring tribes had ever mentioned them. No trade, no conflict, no stories passed down. How could an entire people remain so unseen? Their tools were of pure stone, untouched by the iron, pottery, or farming that even the most isolated groups had long adopted. And then there was the timing. Their discovery came during the rule of Ferdinand Marcos, a dictator keen to cast his nation as a cradle of ancient wonder, a leader in need of a myth. Doubt began to take root. By the mid-1980s, after Marcos had fallen, a Swiss journalist named Oswald Atan returned to the Tosadai lands. But what he found was different. The caves were empty. The Stone Age tribe now wore t-shirts. Some spoke modern dialects fluently. And the original interpreter, once silent, admitted the truth. He had been told to perform. A storm of accusation followed. Hoax, many cried. Fabrication, a global deception, but even in disillusionment, something didn't quite fit because not all was false. Some anthropologists insisted the Tosadai were indeed a real group, perhaps not frozen in time, but still unique. A small offshoot of the Monobo people who had lived in deep forest isolation. Their caves were genuine, their lifestyle distinct, but their image has been crafted, shaped by politics, and by media hungry for a fairy tale. And this is where the mystery endures, because even now, their language remains classified as a distinct tongue, unlike any known Philippine language. Their territory, though protected, is rarely visited. And there are still researchers who believe that parts of their world truly were hidden, perhaps not in time, but in silence. So what does it mean, then, to call a people lost? Must they be ancient, frozen, monumental? Or is it enough that they lived in obscurity, shaping lives with rhythms the modern world never paused to hear? The forests of the Philippines still hold secrets, unmapped valleys, caves only glimpsed from the sky, trails that vanish into undergrowth thick with memory. Could there be others? Families? Clans? Micro-societies still walking beneath a canopy no satellite sees, still speaking dialects no linguist has ever written down. And what of the broader Pacific? Thousands of islands, entire chains scattered like stars across the ocean. Many are still only lightly surveyed. Their forests still hum with ancient wind and older stories. If the Tosadai could step briefly into the modern gaze and vanish once again, who else might be out there, still watching from the shadows? The Tosadai remind us that history is not a line, but a tangle. Sometimes it loops, sometimes it hides, sometimes it performs itself for the world, and then quietly slips back into silence. Were they a hoax, a misunderstood tribe, a manipulated miracle, or something more delicate? A real people whose lives were shaped not by deception, but by misunderstanding? In the end, the Tosadai leave. Us not with certainty, but with a sense of something unfinished, that somewhere in the folds of the forest there may still be those who live by firelight, whose steps have never touched cement, whose words are only spoken under trees. And, if so, What do they still remember that the rest of us have long forgotten? The Kogi, guardians of the living mountain, high above the northern coast of Colombia, where the Caribbean touches the sky, rises a mountain that seems out of place, like something whispered into the world from another age. It stretches from ocean to snow, a single towering breadth of earth, and hidden within its folds, a people still walk the ancient ways. Watching the modern world from behind the clouds, they call it the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, the tallest coastal mountain on the planet, and they call themselves the Kogi, though they prefer another name, the Elder Brothers. Too many, they're just an indigenous tribe tucked away in Colombia's highlands. But to those who've glimpsed their world, the Kogi are something far deeper, the last guardians of an ancient civilization that never crumbled, because it never left. From the air, the Sierra looks like a perfect pyramid, as if carved by something greater than time. Rivers pour from its heart like veins. Forested ridges curl like the petals of a great stone flower. Scattered across these slopes lie remnants. Stone terraces, forgotten stairways, circular platforms lost beneath moss and mist. No highways climb here. No towers pierce the fog. No wires hum across the skyline. Just footpaths worn smooth by centuries of bare feet. And the silence of a people who have always known where they belong, long before the conquistadors ever. Gazed across the sea, the ancestors of the Kogi, the Torona, built cities into the spine of this mountain. Vast, complex, interconnected cities made of stone and intention. When the invaders came, the Torona vanished into the clouds, but they were not destroyed. They became the Kogi, and they remained to the Kogi. The mountain is not home. It is the center of the world. A sacred heart, alive and aware. The Earth Mother Aluna lives here, not as myth, but as presence, and they are her caretakers. Every path they walk, every offering they make, every word spoken by their mamos, the spiritual leaders raised. In dark caves to learn the unseen is done in service to balance. In the Kogi way of seeing, the world must remain in harmony. Every tree, river, animal, and cloud is part of a single living body, and the body, they say, is dying. The Kogi have always known, but they stayed silent. And then, in 1990, they spoke. Their message was simple, chilling, and almost dismissed. The earth is in danger. The rivers are dying. The balance is broken. Decades before climate scientists raised the alarm, the Kogi had already seen what was coming. They spoke of deforestation, poisoned waters, and lost sacred sites. Their warnings were poetic, but not vague, were precise. And now, as their words echo back in the headlines of our age, many wonder, how did they know? Their memory stretches further than ours. Their stories, passed down in silence, may carry echoes of a time before time, of floods, fires, and collapses long buried in forgotten soil. The lost city called Ciudad Perdida, rediscovered in the 1970s, was never lost to the Kogi. To them, it was always Teyuna, a sacred space, watched over by the mamos and their hidden rituals. Satellite scans have since revealed more strange shapes beneath the trees. Perfectly round clearings, unnatural lines carved through jungle no human has touched in centuries. Are these the last bones of a vanished network? Or signs of a civilization we barely understand, still alive in memory, still guiding the footsteps of those who never left? Even the Kogi language is untouched, a thread that stretches back unbroken. Their spiritual texts are not written in ink, but in stone, in constellations, with the murmur of leaves and the rhythm of rivers. And while archaeologists marvel at Torona, engineering their cities built without the wheel or iron, the Kogi simply continue, unimpressed by modern awe. To them, these are not ruins. They are living places. There are whispers, too, of even older truths, connections to vanished Atlantic peoples, to networks of gold, astronomy, and memory that stretch beyond what we're willing to admit, perhaps. Their wisdom predates not only the Spanish, but the Maya. Even the beginning of recorded history. The Kogi do not seek our attention. They do not need our approval. But their presence, quiet, observant, invites us to ask, what if not all ancient civilizations are lost? What if some never needed to rise again because they never fell? What might still be hidden right now in the high places of the earth, not in stone, but in the minds of people who never stopped listening? The Sierra Nevada still stands. Its breath still curls through the trees. The elder brothers still walk beneath the stars, quietly tending to a world that no longer hears them, but they are still here. They are still watching. La Ciudad Blanca, the city the jungle keeps. Not all silences are made of sand. Some are made of leaves. Wet, breathing silences that stretch over mountains and rivers like a living spell. And in the heart of Honduras, where the rainforest folds in on itself and daylight barely breaks the canopy, a different kind of ghost lingers. Not a whisper of dunes, but a memory wrapped in vines. The locals call it La Ciudad Blanca, the White City. Some call it the Lost City of the Monkey God. Others call it a legend. But somewhere deep within the green, beneath the cloud forest, and the thrum of unseen creatures, a truth might still be waiting. The Mesquite jungle of eastern Honduras is not a place that welcomes. It swallows. Mountains slick with moss rise like sleeping giants. Rivers churn with sudden floods. Insects crawl through ancient roots with no memory of human fear. It is a kingdom ruled not by kings, but by time. A time so old it forgets us faster than we can remember. And yet, for centuries, whispers have told of something gleaming beneath it all. In the early 1500s, Spanish conquistadors brought back stories, tales told by trembling lips of a white city hidden in the heart of the jungle. A city rich with idols and treasure, its people now vanished. No temples found, no codices preserved, just rumor and the hush of trees that kept their mouths closed. No explorer ever returned with proof. But the legend refused to die, then came 2012. A team of Honduran and American researchers, armed with LiDAR light detection and ranging, scanned the jungle from above, and the forest blinked. Beneath the canopy, it gave up a secret. Plazas, mounds, roads, geometry, impossible to explain away. The first glimpse of something built, something deliberate. It's not nature, but design. In 2015, a team stepped into one of these LiDAR sites, and what they found defied all expectation. Stone sculptures lay scattered across the ground, half-human faces carved in reverence or fear, ceremonial seats, strange idols. Not like the Maya, not like the Olmec, not like anyone we know. It was as if a different civilization had bloomed and vanished, quietly, never asking to be remembered. Who were they? Their art bore no clear lineage. Their city seemed hurriedly abandoned. No royal tombs, no inscriptions, no claim to empire. They were culturally unique, a lost branch of Mesoamerican life that grew in isolation or by choice. Archaeologists now place their time between 1000 and 1400 AD, a window wide enough for greatness, yet still closed tight by the silence that followed. But the mystery doesn't stop at the jungle floor. Local tribes tell of a cursed city, one that swallows those who find it, a place haunted by spirits, a city that vanishes when pursued. There are stories of shrines and caves, guarded by monkeys with human eyes, of explorers who glimpsed pale walls through the leaves, only to turn back with fever, fear, or worse. Some say the city moves. Some say it never wanted to be found. And still, the forest endures, unfolding and refolding its secrets. Even now, most of the Mesquite region remains unmapped, unexplored, impenetrable. The jungle is not just a place, it is a guardian. Consciousness, and it has not yet finished hiding. Could this city have been one of many? A single outpost of a larger forgotten world? One whose people left no bones, no scripts, just a stillness, broken only by bird calls and breath. Some fringe voices offer wilder thoughts that the city was buried deliberately, sealed by its creators in a final act of protection. That its knowledge was hidden, its treasures cursed. That perhaps they did not just disappear, they descended into earth or myth, into layers of memory where we can no longer follow. Others connect it to flood myths, to cities that retreat beneath waters or into dreams when the world above turns cruel. They compare it to Amazonian tales of golden cities and guardian spirits, seen once and never again. But speculation crumbles before the forest. It offers no truths, only fragments. Stone faces cradled in moss, paved roads overtaken by root and fern, sculptures that seem to look back. So what truly was La Ciudad Blanca? Was it the crown of a hidden kingdom, or just one note in a symphony we've never heard? Were its people destroyed, or did they choose silence? Do their descendants walk among us still under new names in distant villages, carrying rituals, remembered only by moonlight? The forest knows. It is not yet ready to tell. It waits patient as stone for someone to see, not with eyes but with stillness, to listen not to the leaves, but to the gaps between them. And in that listening, maybe, just maybe, we'll find that the white city was never lost at all, only waiting. The Jarawa echoes from the forest beyond time. Not all mysteries lie buried beneath ruins. Some walk among the living, quiet, agile, and unseen. In a corner of the world where the sea glows blue and the jungle holds its breath, a people still move to the rhythm of the ancient. Their names are not spoken in textbooks, or language is barely heard. But in the forests of the Andaman Islands, the Jarawa remain not as relics, but as reminders of another way to be. Beyond the shimmering waters of the Bay of Bengal, beyond the reach of motor roads and satellite towers, an archipelago rises, remote, windswept. Sacred the Andaman Islands, a string of green pearls, scattered across the ocean's surface, hold more than coral reefs and tangled mangroves. They hold time itself, in the dense forests of South and Middle Andaman, where sunlight weaves gently through towering trees and the air carries the scent of salt, earth, and rain. A people live without clocks or wires. They are the Jarawa, a name given by outsiders. They build no cities. They write no histories, yet they know the land better than any map could draw. For more than 50,000 years, they have walked these forests, their lineage stretching back to the earliest human. Migrations out of Africa. They are part of the Negrito peoples, small in stature, dark-skinned, hair curled like coiled memory, who once roamed much of South and Southeast Asia, but while others vanished, assimilated, or were swallowed by the tide of history. Jarawa did not. They endure silent in their wisdom, alert in their forests, untouched not by chance, but by choice. Their bows are made from jungle vines. Their arrows fly with precision through thickets most would fear to enter. They gather honey not from hives, but from memory. Guided by birdsong, by smoke, by instinct, they do not mark seasons on a calendar. They read them in the sea's breath, in the falling of leaves, in the paths of animals, in the hush of birds, and though they are often called primitive, the truth is more complicated. They are not frozen in time. They are awake, aware, choosing silence over surrender, colonial texts from centuries. Past describe them as fierce defenders of their forest with bows raised and eyes unwavering. Attempts to civilize them failed. Gifts were rejected. Contact was avoided. And so the questions deepened. Who were the Jarawa before they were the Jarawa? Whispers from neighboring tribes speak of splinters, of migrations, of other groups lost to war, disease, or sea. Some believe the Jarawa descend from an older Andaman culture, one that may have been more widespread, even more complex. Before rising seas swallowed the land, recent satellite imagery reveals strange patterns along the coast, linear ridges beneath shallow waters, structures too deliberate to be random. Could they be sunken settlements? Hints of a forgotten civilization drowned by time? Linguists have noticed strange echoes in Jarawa speech, words and syllables that bear resemblance to Austroasiatic tongues, spoken far away across the Indian Ocean. Could there have once been a maritime culture that linked these islanders to Madagascar, the Maldives, even distant corners of Southeast Asia? Mainstream archaeologists tread cautiously, and they must. The Jarawa territory is protected, and so it should be. History has taught us that contact often brings ruin, Even a cold, even a flu, can wipe out entire generations, so the forest keeps its secrets. And so do the Jarawa. Their stories are not told in books, but in songs passed down by firelight. Their memory is not etched in stone, but in the shapes of trees and trails only they can see. Some fringe thinkers go further. They imagine the Jarawa as the last echoes of a forgotten oceanic civilization, a network of seafarers who once roamed far beyond what we now believe possible. They dream of ancient songs still sung in unknown dialects, of fire rituals unchanged for thousands of years, of carved stones deep in the forest, overgrown but still sacred. But perhaps the greatest mystery is not their past. It is their persistence in a world devoured by speed, where progress is measured by towers and screens. How does a people remain hidden? How, in the age of GPS, Google Maps, and drone footage, do the Jarawa still live just beyond the edge of our reach? What do they remember that the rest of us forgot? What do they know about the land, the sea, and the human spirit that cannot be captured in photographs or science? To call them unseen is inaccurate. They see, they choose not to be seen, and in that choice perhaps they are not behind us, but ahead. In the hush of the Andaman jungle, there are no easy answers, only wind, birdsong, and footsteps. Soft, ancient, steady, belonging to a people who still carry a rhythm older than history itself. And perhaps that is the truest kind of civilization there is. The phantom cities of Quivira and Cibola, there are places the wind remembers even when the maps forget. Across the sun-scorched bones of America's inland deserts and high plains, ancient names drift like mirages. Cibola, Quivira cities, said to gleam with gold, whispered from lip to lip, from fire to fire. But were they ever built of stone? Or only of longing? We now turn away from coasts and jungles, toward the boundless heart of North America, the land where the horizon burns in amber dust and rivers cut through silence older than any frontier. Here, in the open arms of the Southwest and across the wind-etched plains that stretch toward present-day Kansas, a mystery waits beneath the sagebrush and sand. Not a mystery of pyramids or tombs, but of cities said to shimmer with treasure, not in ruins, but in rumor. They are the lost cities of Cibola and Quivira, myths once hunted with muskets and steel, now chased with radar and memory. It was the 16th century. Spain's conquest of the New World burned bright with the gold of the Aztecs. But ambition is never sated, and tales began to spread of 7 cities, grand and glimmering, north of the known world, where rooftops were precious metal and temples shimmered under the desert sun. One man listened more closely than the rest. Francisco Vasquez de Coronado, Iniwu Siling. He led an army northward, through hardship, desert, and unknown stars, following the scent of gold through lands that would one day become Arizona, New Mexico, and beyond. Along the way, he found pueblos, thriving, intricate communities, made of adobe and sky, but not the glittering kingdoms he craved. Still, the stories persisted. A mysterious guide named El Turco told him of a place even richer than Cibola, a land called Quivira, far across the plains. So Coronado pushed east, across a continent that seemed to stretch forever. But when he reached Quivira, now believed to lie somewhere in Kansas, he found not cities of gold, but grass huts and gentle people. No thrones, no treasure, no empire. He had been misled, or perhaps he misunderstood. The official story ends there with disappointment, but the names did not vanish. Cibola and Quivira lived on in maps, in myths, in memories, etched into rivers, counties, ghost towns, as if the land itself refused to forget. What if the stories weren't lies but echoes? Modern excavations across the American Southwest have uncovered a vast network of long-abandoned settlements. Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, and others unnamed, with roads that vanish into the sand, and ceremonial buildings aligned with stars. What if Cibola and Quivira were not fantasy, but fading memories of real civilizations already in decline when the Spanish arrived? Or what if they were never cities of stone at all, Some scholars now ask if the golden cities may have been seasonal, mobile, or made of organic materials long since reclaimed by time, societies that rose with the rains and vanished with the wind, leaving behind only footprints and stories. And what of the gold? To the conquistadors, gold meant power, empire. But to many indigenous cultures, it meant little. Its shine did not equal worth. What if the golden cities were never meant literally? What if they were sacred places, ritual centers that glowed in myth, not in metal? There are still modern accounts from ranchers, hikers, dreamers, who claim to have found unusual ruins in canyons, glimpsed glinting shapes beneath dry lake beds, or walked into places the map insists don't exist. Most are unverified, many are dismissed, but they persist. And then there are the fringe theories, whispers of Phoenician explorers, of pre-Columbian Chinese fleets, even of Atlantean outposts that left no scrolls. Only stones. Mainstream history stands firm, but silence makes room for speculation, and there is much silence in these lands. So the question remains, were they ever real? Or were Sibylla and Quiviara the names we gave to longing itself, the desperate search for something more, something luminous that was never meant to be found? Even today, their names haunt the wind that sweeps through empty riverbeds and rustling cottonwoods. They are written into the bones of the land, as if some truth still lingers there, just beneath the dust. In the end, the gold may have been a mirage. But perhaps it was never about gold. Perhaps it was about what lies just beyond our grasp, the cities we seek when we follow the pull of forgotten stories, the shimmer on the horizon we chase, even when we know it will vanish in the vastness of the American interior. Beneath the open sky and the low hum of memory, you can still hear it, the sound of footsteps searching for something that might never have been, or something that still waits, patient and hidden beneath centuries of silence.